School Figure TV. Revolutionary salute. Revolutionary salute. Like, share, subscribe. Welcome to the House of Revolution. You know I'm your humble host, the y'all mean of revolution. Iran crushes U.S. Mossad agents get their country back, but Trump say he's about to attack. Before we get into that, be sure to wipe your feet. That means hit the like button. You in the House of Revolution. Like, share, subscribe, support the platform, y'all. Well, World War III is amongst us. Iran is showing the world how you deal with provocateurs in their country. Let's get into the content. Salute.
President Donald Trump has issued a statement in Persian to people of Iran via the State Department.
President Donald Trump sent a major warning to the Iranian regime in a Truth Social post. It reads, "If Iran shoots and violently kills peaceful protesters, which is their custom, the United States of America will come to their rescue."
Trump said that the U.S. will aid the protesters and issued a stern warning to Iran that it would get hit very hard if more protesters died during demonstrations.
Well, all is a Trump court,
because this moment demands bluntness, not polite slogans. When you see streets burning, when you see public property smashed, when you see ordinary people afraid to go to work or take their children to school, you have to ask the real question: who benefits? Who benefits from chaos in Tehran? Who benefits when Iran is portrayed as unstable, cracking, on the edge? Because I promise you, the people cheering loudest from abroad are not doing it out of love for Iranians. They're doing it because they smell an opportunity. And that is exactly why Ayatollah Ali Khamenei's stance matters right now.
کسانی هم هستن که کارشون تخریبه. دیشب در تهران در بعضی جای دیگه یه مش تخریبگر آمدن ساختمان متعلق به کشور خودشون رو خراب کردن. مثلا فرض کنید فلان ساختمان دیواری رو خراب کردن برای اینکه دل رئیس جمهور آمریکا خوش بشه.
See, what the mainstream media not going to show is the millions of people that then took to the streets to support their nation, their government. The U.S. not going to show you that. I seen them having an Iranian protest in Los Angeles. Oh, what a joke.
چون او گفته که حرف بی ربطی که اگر چنانچه دولت ایران چنین کنه من میام به طرف شما رو میگیرم. این طرف این اغتشاشگرها و افراد مضر برای کشور، این هم دلشون اون خوشه. او اگه میتونه کشور خودش رو اداره کنه، تو کشور خودش حوادث گوناگونی وجود داره.
He's not treating this as a romantic uprising. He's framing it as a security and sovereignty issue, an attempt to turn legitimate frustrations into a weapon against the state. And he's been consistent about one thing for years. He calls American leaders arrogant. He calls their posture a form of imperial bullying. And he warns that arrogant powers overreach, then eventually collapse under the weight of their own hubris. So when he points directly at Donald Trump, at arrogance, at swagger, at that reckless I can do anything mindset, he's not improvising. He's describing a pattern, the bully's psychology, the empire's method, the trap being set for countries that refuse to kneel. Take a moment to like and share this video to help me out. Thank you. Let me ask you this. What kind of friend of the people tries to strangle an entire nation's economy and then pretends the suffering is a gift? What kind of support starts with sanctions, threats, financial isolation, and endless sabotage, and then claims it's about democracy? This is why I call Trump what he is, an arrogant bully, a man whose entire worldview is domination. Maximum pressure was not diplomacy, it was economic siege. And siege warfare has always had one purpose: break the will, fracture the society, force surrender. That is not compassion. That is coercion. And when I hear Trump and his circle making noise about Iran today, I'm reminded very strongly of other loud men in history who thought they could threaten sovereign nations, intimidate entire regions, and escape the consequences forever. Think about the story arc of arrogance. It begins with swagger. I am untouchable. It moves into overreach. I can do more. Then comes isolation. Everyone must obey me. Then the internal rot grows. Why is everything resisting? And finally, the collapse arrives, sometimes by external intervention, sometimes by internal fracture, sometimes by both. Saddam Hussein thought he could reorder the region by force and fear, and he ended in ruin. This is Trump bragging like an emperor.
We'll see what happens over there. They know, though, that it's a stampede.
I guess the best word.
They have like a stampede. You talk.
Revolutionary salute to the new member to the House of Revolution. Your mom's at 668. Appreciate you for getting your membership to the House of Revolution. Revolution is a way of life. I appreciate the love, family. Salute.
Talk about stampede for cattle, but the people are stampeding, and you're losing a lot of people with the stampedes. There's so many people protesting. Nobody's ever seen anything like what's happening right now. But I have put Iran on notice that if they start shooting at them, these people are totally unarmed people, and they love their country. They want something to happen. Look at their country. They've gone back 150 years. But I've told them that if they do anything bad to these people, we're going to hit them very hard.
So if there is mass murder by the Iranian Ayatollahs and those leadership, you're pledging to the people of Iran that you will come to their aid.
I've said it very loud and very clear. Yeah, that's what we're going to do.
I have this hat. I guess you were playing golf with Lindsey Graham.
Yeah, I did that for Lindsey Graham.
Yeah. It says make Iran great again.
And what he means by that, because I said, this is a little tricky hat.
Yeah.
Why do you want me to sign this hat?
I don't know.
He's
Can I
really
auction
talking
this
about
off on
the
eBay?
riots.
Can I sell this?
Yeah,
It's probably worth a lot of money.
Kept my signature.
Yeah.
Yeah, but he asked me to sign that. I said, there's a lot of definitions for that. And what he's talking about is the people that are, protesting, I guess is the only word you can use. It's really the biggest protest I've ever seen. The people that are protesting, if they take over the country, he wants to see if Iran can be great again. Years ago, a friend of mine was a developer from New York, and I was a young developer, and he went to Iran and he built buildings in Iran, and he made a lot of money, and he did very well. And it was like condos and rentals, and he loved Iran. He thought it was great. And he did a lot of work there. He did a tremendous amount of work. He loved the people. He thought they were so incredible. And then it all stopped when this stuff started happening.
In 1979.
Yeah,
then
it stopped like magic.
444 days, Americans held hostage.
Yeah.
Now, some of you will say, but people are protesting. Doesn't that mean the government is weak? No. Protests happen in every society, especially societies under pressure. The real question is whether protests are organic expressions of public life, or whether they have been hijacked into a foreign-directed destabilization operation. And yes, I will say it clearly, what we are seeing is not simply people speaking. We are seeing the familiar fingerprints of hybrid warfare, media agitation, networked coordination, psychological operations, and the deliberate escalation from protest into vandalism, arson, sabotage, and street intimidation. This is how modern destabilization works. The Iranian foreign minister answered the Mossad question in all the destabilization going in Tehran city.
الإيراني لحلحلة وتسوية هذه المشاكل. البته یک تفاوت وجود دارد. إلا أنه هناك فرق بين ما حصل سابقا وبين ما يحصل حاليا. و اون اینکه هم آمریکا و هم اسرائیل رسما اعلام کردن که در این آشوب‌ها دخالت دارن و نقش دارن. وهو ما صرح به الامريكان والجانب الاسرائيلي بانهم لديهم ضلوع مباشر وتدخل مباشر في هذه الاضطرابات الموجوده الحاليه في ايران و تلاش میکنن که این تظاهرات و اعتراضهای صلح‌آمیز رو به خوش هذه التغريده.
And that's where the Mossad question comes in.
نه به بیمارستان رحم کردن و 2 مرکز درمانی رو مورد حجم قرار دادن، نه به زیرساخت‌های اقتصادی کشور 26 بانک رو بهش حمله کردن، به خانه خدا و مساجد 25 مسجد رو حمله کردن، آتش زدن و به پایگاه‌های بسیج به مجموعه در واقع انتظامی حمله کردند و دنبال کردند تا با هرج و مرجی که انجام میدن یک التهاب و یک تصور غلط رو ایجاد کنند. در شهر التهاب ایجاد کنند و در دشمنان تصور غلط. ما 48 دستگاه آتش نشانیمون رو آتش زدن. یعنی ما برای خاموش کردن آتش میرفتیم، هم به آتش نشانان ما حمله میکردند که این در نوع خودش خیلی نظیر نداره، و هم دستگاه‌های سنگین و سبک ما رو آتش می‌زدن. 8 دستگاه سنگین آتش نشانی ما رو آتش زدن.
People pretend to be shocked when Iran talks about Israeli intelligence involvement. Shocked. This is the region we live in. Israel has a long culture of sabotage, covert action, infiltration, disinformation, and psychological pressure against adversaries.
That should have been yours. I want you to imagine, just imagine, how your life could be different if Iran was free. You could speak your mind without fear. You could make a joke without wondering if you'd be carted off to Evin prison. Close your eyes. Picture the faces of your children, beautiful, innocent souls. Think of the endless potential they would have. Their entire lives are ahead of them. Imagine how your children's lives would look if billions of dollars were invested in them instead of being wasted on wars that can't be won. They would receive world-class education. You would receive beautiful roads, advanced...
It is not a secret that Israel views a strong Iran as a strategic obstacle. So, if you believe Israel would never try to exploit unrest in Tehran through agents, funding pipelines, cyber agitation, propaganda networks, and recruitment, then you are not being skeptical, you are being naive. The goal is not to help Iranians, the goal is to destabilize Iran, weaken its strategic posture, fracture its internal unity, and then celebrate the chaos as freedom. That is the Zionist playbook. Weaken the spine, then demand the nation bends. Iran has seen major protest waves before. In 2009, there was mass unrest linked to election disputes. It shook the country, it dominated headlines, it was presented as the beginning of the end. It was not. The state contained it. The institutions held. Then in 2019, fuel price protests erupted and escalated with a far more intense security response and a severe communication clampdown. The state contained it. The institutions held. In 2022, unrest surged again after a tragic death became a flashpoint, again framed abroad as imminent collapse, again contained. The institutions held. So when I hear people shouting today, this time is different, I ask them, based on what? Based on a hashtag? Based on foreign media excitement? Based on the fantasies of people who have been wrong about Iran for decades? Here's the truth. Iran's system is not a flimsy tent held up by one personality. It is an institutional state with layers of governance, security, religious legitimacy, and social networks built over decades, hardened by war, hardened by sanctions, hardened by continuous external hostility. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, for example, is not some rental force that melts away because foreigners clap. It is a pillar of state defense and internal stability, deeply integrated into the security architecture and fiercely committed to the survival of the republic. And in moments like this, loyalty is not theoretical. Loyalty becomes operational. Now, I want to address the American protest issue head on, because nothing exposes Western hypocrisy like watching how the US treats unrest on its own soil. In America, protest is celebrated in speeches and crushed in practice, especially when it threatens the state's sense of control. Look at the history. Civil rights marches met with police dogs and batons, anti-war protests met with surveillance and repression, and more recently, mass racial justice protests met with militarized policing, tear gas, rubber bullets, mass arrests, and aggressive crowd control. That is not ancient history. That is modern America. And it always comes wrapped in the language of law and order, as if the state is a fragile porcelain object and the public must tiptoe around it. And let's talk about what happened recently in Minneapolis in the most direct terms. A federal immigration operation ends with a fatal shooting. Authorities rush to justify. Officials argue over the narrative, and the public is left demanding accountability. And I'm not even saying this to score cheap points. I'm saying it because this is the exact hypocrisy at the core of the West's propaganda. America can use force domestically, justify it instantly, and then moralize at other nations for defending public order. America can treat unrest as a security threat and then lecture Iran for treating unrest as a security threat. Do you see the scam? The rule is simple. The empire reserves the right to enforce stability for itself and denies that right to countries it wants to weaken. So when Iran responds to riots, sabotage, and violent disruption with security measures, judicial processes, and enforcement, the West screams crackdown. But when America does it often with less accountability and far more systemic bias, it's necessary. This is not about rights. It's about hierarchy. It's about who gets to be sovereign and who must be kept permanently vulnerable. Now, you might be thinking, but what about grievances? Aren't there real problems? Of course, there are problems. Iran is under siege, economic warfare, sanctions, financial isolation, and relentless destabilization attempts. And that pressure creates hardship. But let me tell you what the enemies of Iran do with hardship. They don't relieve it, they weaponize it. They aim to turn economic pain into political collapse.
Make it worse.
They aim to turn frustration into street chaos. They aim to turn a citizen's complaint into a foreign-funded riot. They want Iranians to blame their own state for the suffering imposed by outsiders. That is the psychological trick. Stab you, then blame your body for bleeding. And this is where the Islamic Republic's framing becomes not just ideological, but logical. There is a difference between peaceful civic expression and organized criminal disruption. There is a difference between someone demanding better economic management and someone torching public property, attacking security forces, or paralyzing a city so the country looks broken on foreign screens. The state's duty is to protect the public, protect infrastructure, protect lives, and protect sovereignty. And yes, when necessary, deal decisively with violent elements through lawful security operations and judicial processes, not out of cruelty, but out of responsibility. Because stability is not a luxury, stability is the foundation of national survival. So let me state the core conclusion plainly. These protests will not bring down the Islamic Republic. They will not. Not because the state is perfect, but because the state has resilience, institutional depth, and a security architecture designed for exactly this kind of hybrid pressure. And because the idea that the Republic can be toppled by street disorder is largely a foreign fantasy kept alive by hostile media and intelligence services that need their audiences to believe Iran is always about to fall. Thank you for your time. Support my work by subscribing to the channel. God bless you.
دی‌ماه 1404 10 دقیقه به
Visual evidence shows that on most of Tehran's main streets at 10 p.m. on January 10, 2026, there were no rioters compared to the previous 2 days, and the situation was completely calm, Tasnim News reported. IRIB also reported that on several streets, there were scattered crowds but much smaller and briefer because they did not have supporters, gathering and preparing to cause riots and chaos, which were then dispersed by the police. An Iranian resident drives past Pasdaran Street in Tehran at 10 p.m. on the evening to Harabi Square, where the neighborhood witnessed one of the largest crowds on Thursday night. Anti-Iranian networks claimed that Harabi Square was the center of the demonstrations, but in reality the situation there was calm, with no crowds at all. The IRGC intelligence has once again reaffirmed its commitment to standing with the Iranian people, warning that conspirators backed by foreign agencies aiming to destabilize the country will be completely confronted. Security forces are now continuing to arrest more vandals responsible for attacking and burning mosques, homes, and shops in recent days. Detained Iranian rioters revealed that they had been contacted online and were armed with sharp weapons and the rioters' preferred firearms. They were also instructed to hit people, not just doors or walls. Furthermore, rioters in Iran have literally set fire to mosques, a total of 25 across Iran in recent days. It is worth noting that burning mosques is an act of utter hostility and a declaration of war on culture and civilization. The rioters are burning mosques, markets, and people's homes. The same people who attacked this country are now ordering them to do so. America and Israel are sitting there teaching them a lesson, the Iranian president said.
What they really not going to put on the news is that they done brought down Elon Musk Starlink. They're not going to tell people that.
So as protests in Iran intensified, the images of the demonstration and ensuing crackdown are filtering out of the country despite a countrywide internet and international communications blackout that was imposed on Thursday night.
Amid raging protests in the Islamic Republic, Iran has been hit with a near total nationwide internet blackout for more than 60 hours.
On Thursday night, online monitor NetBlocks reported a nationwide internet blackout, which it said was an attempt to interrupt communications.
5 p.m. in Tehran, 13th of January 2026, and the moment Starlink goes unreliable is the moment you realize this isn't just a domestic blackout anymore, it's a sovereignty contest in the electromagnetic spectrum. Rooftop dishes that were supposed to route around state-controlled infrastructure start failing, connections collapse into endless retrees, and the one escape hatch people believed they had begins to feel like it has a lid on it too. Iran didn't kill Starlink globally, but it demonstrated something far more practical and repeatable. It can suppress Starlink inside its own territory when it decides the information environment has become a national security threat. The Guardian characterized the shutdown as unusually sophisticated and emphasized the deliberate, controlled nature of Iran's connectivity squeeze. AP documented strong indications of interference severe enough to degrade Starlink-linked connectivity, including GPS-related disruption that can destabilize terminal performance. The pattern is simple. You don't need to shoot satellites out of the sky to win this round. You just need to make the terminals struggle to lock, sync, and sustain stable links in the places that matter. Here's what that secret technology looks like in real life. It isn't a sci-fi EMP wave. It's electronic warfare, military-grade jamming, and signal manipulation. Starlink terminals rely on precise timing and consistent radio links. If you flood an area with GNSS, GPS interference, you can create instability in how devices coordinate and authenticate. If you jam the frequencies used for uplink and downlink selectively, geographically, and in bursts, you don't need to destroy anything in orbit. You just degrade the user experience until it becomes useless for real-time communication. That's the core insight this episode puts on display. The choke point isn't always the satellite, it's the ground-level link where a state can bring concentrated power to bear. Take a moment to like and share this video to help me out, thank you. And let's be honest about why this hits such a nerve. Starlink was sold to the public as connectivity, but in contested spaces it becomes political leverage. In Iran's framing, unauthorized terminals aren't neutral gadgets, they're instruments that can help bypass national controls at the exact moment the state is trying to contain unrest, prevent coordination, and manage narratives. Iran has already escalated the dispute into formal channels. Its repeated complaints through international telecom mechanisms about unauthorized Starlink operation underscore that Tehran sees this as a sovereignty violation, not a mere consumer tech issue. When the state believes the battlefield is information itself, it will treat the antenna on a rooftop like a strategic asset. Now add Elon Musk to the story and you get a perfect storm. Musk controls SpaceX's Starlink, and he controls X, a global amplifier of political narrative. That combination makes him look less like a businessman and more like an unelected power broker in the eyes of governments. Al Jazeera highlighted how symbolic fights around X and Iran's online space are unfolding alongside the blackout and Starlink disruption. Meanwhile, the Ukraine precedent hangs over everything. Reuters has documented how decisions around Starlink coverage had real operational consequences in a wartime environment, and that reality taught capitals around the world a blunt lesson. Private infrastructure can become de facto strategic infrastructure, and states will respond accordingly. This is also why Washington can interpret Starlink suppression as more than an internal Iranian tactic. In a US strategic worldview, interfering with systems that serve allies and shape information flows can be framed as hostile behavior, even if the interference is geographically limited. That's the escalation risk. A state asserts internal control, a superpower interprets it as external aggression, and both sides begin climbing ladders they claim they didn't want to climb. And that's where Trump enters the frame, not as an abstract figure, but as a president with a reputation for treating symbols of US leverage as red lines. Early this month, major outlets had already put on the record that Trump was issuing threats and weighing options tied to Iran's internal crackdown and the broader confrontation atmosphere. The Financial Times described Trump deliberations and the sharpening posture around Iran. Reuters captured Iran's deterrent message delivered by Parliament Speaker Mohammad Bakr Kalibaf.
I also have a single piece of advice for the delusional President of the United States. You must exercise extreme caution that the strategic recommendations being presented to you concerning an assault on Iran do not turn out to be of the same unreliable nature as the counsel that previously caused you to erroneously announce that Mossad had already fallen. Therefore, to ensure you do not fall victim to any grave miscalculation, understand this clearly. Should you proceed with an attack on Iran, both the occupied territories and all military centers and bases, and American ships in the region will become our legitimate targets. And with these explicit confessions you've made about your intent for military aggression against Iran, within the established framework of our conditional defense policy, we do not restrict ourselves to merely reacting after an action has already been initiated, but rather we will take proactive measures based on clear and objective indications of an imminent threat. I needed to tell you and all your allies in the region not to make a miscalculation, because regret will be of no benefit. Allahu Akbar. Allah, Allah. I also have a single piece of advice for the delusional President of the United States. You must exercise extreme caution that the strategic recommendations being presented to you concerning an assault on Iran do not turn out to be of the same unreliable nature as the counsel that previously caused you to erroneously announce that Mossad had already fallen. Therefore, to ensure you do not fall victim to any grave miscalculation, understand this clearly. Should you proceed with an attack on Iran, both the occupied territories and all military centers and bases, and American ships in the region will become our legitimate targets. And with these explicit confessions you've made about your intent for military aggression against Iran, within the established framework of our conditional defense policy, we do not restrict ourselves to merely reacting after an action has already been initiated, but rather we will take proactive measures based on clear and objective indications of an imminent threat. I needed to tell you and all your allies in the region not to make a miscalculation, because regret will be of no benefit. Allahu Akbar.
Any US attack triggers retaliation, and US bases in Israel become legitimate targets in that scenario. Al Jazeera's live coverage tracked the intensity of Trump's rhetoric and the sense that Washington was keeping military options within view. From a pro-Iranian sovereignty lens, the logic is straightforward. Tehran sees an old pattern. External pressure packaged as moral concern, sanctions packaged as rules, covert influence packaged as support for the people, and then the threat of force when the state refuses to bend. Chinese state-linked coverage echoed that general framing, casting US messaging as interference and emphasizing Iranian claims that unrest is exploited by adversaries. You don't have to accept every allegation to grasp the strategic psychology. Iran assumes hostile intent because it has experienced hostile intent repeatedly, from sanctions to assassinations to cyber operations to overt threats. So what does a Trump response realistically look like if this spirals? It doesn't have to start with a full-scale war. Escalation can be modular: intensified cyber operations, expanded sanctions, public ultimata, visible deployments, and selective strikes framed as limited. The United States can surge air and missile defense coverage for partners, reposition naval and air assets, and quietly widen intelligence support. At the same time, Washington can try to out-innovate the jamming problem, pushing technical countermeasures to harden terminals and keep links alive under interference, a dynamic the world already watched play out in the Russia-Ukraine Starlink jamming contest. Iran's response posture, if attacked, is also modular and designed to punish without handing an opponent an easy, decisive target. The deterrent message is not subtle. Escalation expands the battlefield. The emphasis is on regional vulnerability bases, infrastructure, partner states, and the political shockwaves that come from sustained disruption. Iran's strategic culture leans toward asymmetric pressure, layered capabilities, and the use of aligned actors to create multiple dilemmas at once. That doesn't mean constant war. It means Iran tries to make the cost of attacking Iran feel immediate, spread out, and politically painful. Now let's deal with the nuclear rumor layer, because every Iran crisis eventually drags it into the room. As of this moment, the public record does not show a verified Iranian nuclear test or a confirmed nuclear weapon reveal. What it does show is deep uncertainty, reduced transparency, and repeated warnings about verification gaps and stockpile accounting. Reuters has captured IAEA concerns about the difficulty of fully accounting for Iran's enriched uranium stock and the challenges inspectors face. AP coverage has emphasized the IAEA's limited access and the reliance on partial monitoring and satellite imagery in certain contexts. US congressional research material has discussed how breakout time for enough highly enriched uranium can be very short if Iran chose that path, while also distinguishing the production of material from building and delivering a weapon. That distinction matters, but so does the political effect. When transparency collapses, worst-case assumptions fill the vacuum. If this Starlink suppression episode becomes a wider confrontation, the nuclear file becomes a shadow over every decision. Hawks argue force prevents a sprint. Doves argue force causes the sprint. Iran's deterrence logic argues something else entirely. Existential pressure proves the need for stronger strategic insurance. That is the tragedy of escalation. Each side claims it is acting defensively, and each side's defense convinces the other side to harden further. Israel's perspective is the accelerant in the room. Reuters has described Israel's heightened alert and the intense coordination and concern around the prospect of US-Iran escalation. Israel views Iranian capability expansion, whether missiles, drones, cyber, or nuclear latency, as an immediate strategic threat. And when Israel is nervous, it tends to move early, not late, because its doctrine prizes preemption and rapid initiative. That creates another danger. Even if Washington and Tehran try to manage the latter, the regional security ecosystem has additional actors with their own clocks, their own fears, and their own incentives. Russia and China hover at the edge as strategic beneficiaries of US distraction, but their roles should be handled carefully. There is no public verified proof that Moscow handed Iran a turnkey anti-Starlink package for this particular blackout. What is real is the broader reality that jamming Starlink is a known contest domain, with Russia having pursued disruption efforts in Ukraine and others studying the same problem. China's positioning, in turn, typically emphasizes sovereignty, non-interference, and stability, while protecting its economic interests and energy security. Beijing will call for restraint publicly and maneuver privately to protect regional flows and its partnerships. Both Moscow and Beijing gain when Washington is consumed by Middle East escalation rather than focusing its full strategic bandwidth elsewhere. Europe, India, Brazil, and the wider world respond with a mix of condemnation, hedging, and economic anxiety. Europe worries about energy shocks and political spillover. Non-aligned powers weigh principles against interests, often choosing cautious language and quiet diplomacy. Global institutions call for restraint, dialogue, and protection of civilians because everyone understands that once regional escalation starts, it rarely stays tidy. And that brings us back to the core revelation of this day in Tehran. Space isn't the only battlefield for space systems. The decisive fight can happen on the ground, in cities, over rooftops, inside the invisible physics of signal and noise. Iran showed it can contest the supposedly uncontestable, turning a satellite internet promise into something fragile under pressure. That's not a miracle weapon. It's disciplined statecraft applied to a technological dependency. If you're asking what comes next, I see three likely futures, and none of them are comfortable. First, more states will adopt Iran's approach, treat LEO satellite internet as a system to be mapped, regulated, and jammed locally during crises. Second, SpaceX and competitors will harden networks and terminals against interference, because the market demand for resilient connectivity will explode precisely where states want control. Third, the United States will keep drifting toward an escalation doctrine where communications infrastructure, nominally civilian, gets treated as a strategic red line, because modern conflict collapses the boundary between civilian and military connectivity. Thank you for watching to this side of things. Support honest journalism by subscribing to increase the reach of the channel. Until I see you in the next one, God bless you.
neocons like Lindsey Graham are just salivating right now about what's happening in Iran right now, hoping for a regime change. And the ongoing protests over the weekend gave plenty of fuel to their fire. So let's talk about what's actually happening in Iran right now, because your timeline is being flooded with rage bait and all sorts of fake news clips, old clips. If you've been online the past few days, you've seen the clips that Iran is exploding, cities on fire, the people have risen up. The regime is finished. That's what you're hearing. A lot of that content is either mislabeled, it's years old, it's from a different country entirely, or it's edited to look like it's new. It's actually not. A lot of fact checkers have already tracked down where a lot of people are using older protest video from Iran. Sometimes the video is like from totally other countries, but don't let facts get in the way. So it's crazy. This is the same thing, by the way, that happened in Venezuela 2 weeks ago. All these conservative influencers just keep sharing this stuff. A friend of the show, Glenn Greenwald, called them out. He's like, hey, yeah, just keep sharing all this fake news. Like, why do you keep putting this out there? This is fake. This is years old video, but it doesn't matter. So what is real? Well, according to our sources, Iran is going dark digitally on purpose. Other news organizations have reported a nationwide blackout. When the internet goes down or is being blocked, of course, the information war gets turned up to 11. Got to fill that void. A lot of fake news, rage bait. And even satellite workarounds right now are getting squeezed. Reports today that Iran is not only shutting down normal internet traffic, but also attempting to disrupt Starlink connections. We can tell you that Starlink service is being interfered with beyond just the normal basic GPS jamming. Our own sources are telling us that foreign partners are helping Iran with this blackout, China and Russia specifically, helping to jam communications. Satellite phones, satellite internet, and other links that are going out. You're hearing names like Starlink, Iridium, Inmarsat, Thuria. So if those names pop up, being blocked. What we can say again, according to our own sources, is that Iran is in an unusually sophisticated communications clampdown right now, and on purpose, to basically close down prying eyes looking into their country and information going out of their country. It's a two-way street right now being closed down. China is the key player in this jamming equipment that's being used right now. We're also hearing reports of concerning health risks within the radius of this equipment, where it has been deployed. Just so you understand what we're talking about, like if you think like 6G is terrifying on the human body, this is like 10,000 times worse. China has flown several key Skyfreight. Let me say that again. China has flown several Skyfreight. Freight. I can't say because I'm jumping to the next word. Flights. So Skyfreight flights with this jamming equipment into the country. Starlink, Iridium, Globalsat, Inmarsat, Thuria. So that's the satellite communications piece as well as the internet traffic piece of all of this. We've also got an update on the number of people killed in Iran. Now, Iranian media is still publicly saying that only 500 people have been killed, with 300 injured. Our source says that's not true. It's also not true what Mossad and CIA and MI6 are pushing out. They're pushing out numbers that are being shared across social media to the Mockingbird media. The Mockingbird media loves to run with whatever the CIA puts out there, saying that 150,000 or 300,000 people are dead and 200,000 injured. That is also a lie. The actual number we can report, according to our sources, is 2,150 dead, 480 injured, and 620 missing as of yesterday. Those numbers are as of yesterday across 11 cities in Iran. Now, a lot to unpack here. Again, a lot. So a lot of misinformation being shared online. But hey, it also helps to actually go to Iran and report on the ground. And that's exactly what our next guest has just done. Dr. Miram Susli, a reporter who was just in Iran, has been covering the destructions from the last round of Israeli bombings on civilian infrastructure, specifically on residential buildings. And some of the videos that she's been sharing are just horrifying, of children's strollers strewn across the street. Horrible stuff. She goes by the name of Syrian Girl online. Doctor, great to have you here on the show. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really glad to be here.
So you just returned from Iran. Can you tell us, what is it like right now on the ground? What are you hearing from just the people? There's so much misinformation and disinformation and lies being spread online. What can you tell us?
Well, when I went there, everything was pretty normal. I was actually very impressed at how advanced everything was. I was able to take the metro, and here where I live, in the city I live in Australia, we actually don't have a metro system at all. So I was impressed with that. I was impressed with the infrastructure, and the fact that I went there in my capacity as a scientist. There was a science award being given out, and I actually had to force one of the girls that were working for this science award. It's called the Mustafa Prize. It's kind of like the Nobel Prize that Iran hands out, to come with me out of this conference and go shopping, because I wanted to see things and I just didn't want to go around alone. I was really happy to see it would, economically it seemed like business as usual. There was no blackouts. There was really nothing to protest about, because women actually, we discussed this in the conference. They were graduating university at percentages higher than men, and they were dominating in the science field. And they were talking about, we have to encourage more of our boys to pursue advanced learning, and they can walk around without scarf. I mean, I thought that going into it, I was bringing very modest clothing, and as soon as I got even into the plane, I realized that maybe I had been propagandized about how the laws are there. So like, women are able to walk around with their hair showing and nobody's getting beaten up. None of that, as we're being told in the media. So what is this protest really about? Because they're telling us like, oh, they're pushing radical feminists in our face, saying like, we want to like, I don't know if you guys remember Pussy Riots in Russia.
Yes.
And how they were, masturbating with chickens in the supermarket. And I think that that's the level of freedom that they're seeking for women. Like, they're seeking for OnlyFans to be pushed onto all Iranian women, so that like this Israeli guy, or is it like an American Zionist Jewish man, he takes all the money from OnlyFans and he gives it to Israel. And that's what they want to do. They want to open the market of females in Iran, and exploit them in the way that the rest of the world is being exploited.
Yeah, OnlyFans has been so great for American women, right? I mean, it's been, yeah. So you can imagine why a country doesn't want that kind of filth in their country, like Russia does not want that filth in their country. It's shocking. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
And
sorry to interrupt.
Iran, no, please. I'm like, it's good to have banter, but yeah, Iran doesn't want that either. And I just think that what is this really about? It's about opening the economy. It's about opening the mentality of people to this hegemon, this like liberal world order. Forcing them to have McDonald's, forcing them to have global like oil markets, and as they're doing now with Syria, they're controlling the oil, they're controlling the production, and they're actually shut down Syrian-owned nationalized oil refineries that are perfectly fine, so that some American company, who I forget which one it was, so I'm not going to say which one it was, can build a new one, so that they can control the outflow of oil and how much profit comes out of it. So Iran is really about Israel, because all of these wars are about Israel at the end of the day. And if you have Lindsey Graham, he will explain that to you. They want to protect the Zionist entity, unfortunately, because the Zionists in the United States are very powerful. The Zionist lobby dominates US politics, and it drags the US into multiple wars, including the Iraq war, including the war in Syria. And the greatest irony is, in Syria, they actually supported Al-Qaeda and all of these very oppressive to women groups. Meanwhile, women are getting kidnapped all over Syria and trafficked by the militias that are backed by Israel and the US. Right. And they pretend to care about women in Iran. It's the same story. It's about selling it to the West. It's about selling the regime change to the West.
I'm trying to connect the dots between what we actually know, because we know 2 years ago, the Washington Post exposed that the CIA through Graphica and Stanford labs were doing psyops in Afghanistan and Iran to begin with. And a lot of the psyops were, hey, here's a recipe, but also let's overthrow the Shah because we feel oppressed. So we will never know, because the CIA was created in order to subvert these governments. We just like in Syria, the Ba'athist government wanted prosperity for Syrians, and we couldn't have that. In Iran, there was prosperity to the point that the Shah wanted to create deserts, farmland out of deserts. They thought they had so much money that they could do that. But we don't know the will of those people. We only know what our government tells them that they would want, tells us what they want. And then the fact that they are under crippling sanctions from us. So how can we know anything other than those few facts at the nucleus of what we're trying to find out?
So this is exactly how sanctions work and how they work in Syria. They starve people to the point where they become desperate and malleable to ideas and money from outside. So the so-called rebel militias in Syria, like they were getting paid $150 a month by the CIA, by the Pentagon, and this is on record. Like this, it's not a conspiracy theory. So please, if you look up Operation Timber Sycamore, like one of the groups they were paying ended up beheading a 12-year-old boy in Aleppo. So they on camera. So the thing is that the sanctions are designed to cause the instability, and they blame the starvation on the government.
Well, that's what we're saying. Yeah, in our chat room, they're like, people don't have food. Someone in our chat room just said, yeah, people don't have food. They don't have water. They don't have. So again, you take away basic services through sanctions and you make it look like it's part of the government. Is that true?
I think it's kind of accelerated since a couple of months ago that I was there, because I didn't see any issues with the water or electricity. But I've heard there's been an acute crisis of water in Iran recently. And I think I even saw some of these, CIA, Mossad-backed individuals purposely dumping water and wasting water as a argument against the regime. I mean, it's on Twitter if you want to see like protesters waste water. Yeah. So, luckily it's colder now. There's not going to be as much, people dying of thirst, I suppose. But this is all part of the war machine against Iran. And what we know is Netanyahu has been begging the U.S. to go to war with Iran for decades. And he's going to film doing that. And Charlie Kirk fought against that. He resisted that. And, he would have been a voice against this going on now. Yes. And my sources tell me that war is coming very shortly. And this whole attempted regime change operation, I mean, it's not just protesters. People need to understand, like in Syria as well, it wasn't just protesters. There were these gun runners sending in weapons through the border. For Syria, it was through Turkey. And for Iran, it's through Iraq and Turkey, I think, because they're using Kurdish militias as well.
So you're hearing from your sources in Iran that war is coming. They are preparing for war.
No, the sources in the Middle East, I would be more specific. And that there is like some preparations, defensive preparations for war by the end of the month. I think, for Iran, unfortunately, like they're kind of they've issued a fatwa against nuclearization, saying that it's an indiscriminate weapon. And I feel that, the sites that you guys discussed where I went to inside Iran, it was locations, neighborhoods that like entire residential buildings and like surrounding residential buildings that were completely demolished because one scientist lives there. And I went there in my capacity as a scientist as well as a journalist for the Science Award. And so we visited the homes of these scientists that were murdered and their families. And they are doing peaceful nuclear power. And that is kind of helpful to the countries because it doesn't have to have any oil restrictions. It doesn't have to have any power cuts. And of course, making sure that Iran does have power cuts is something that would be beneficial to the Mossad and the Israelis and the CIA, because then they can push for their color revolution. But if they have nuclear power, that's going to make it very hard to do. So, but yeah, when I say unfortunately, I do think that they should nuclearize. I do think that they should have the bomb, because I think that unfortunately we live in a world where if you don't have the bomb, your country is going to be destroyed. And Israel has illegal nuclear weapons, and there has to be some sort of a balance to that, because Israel, as we saw, is committing a genocide. It's completely unhinged. It is basically the Jewish ISIS. And the Jewish, I like to say the Jewish state in the Levant. I think Max Blumenthal kind of coined that one. But it fits. It really fits. And so there needs to be some sort of a balance. And Iran is, if once it's taken out, that balance is gone.
Well, I mean, think about the logic here. It would be hysterical if it wasn't about human lives, because Israel's saying, and the United States are saying, we really care about Iranian lives, and we don't want to see this protest, and it's about us. And you're like, how is it about you at all? But okay, you're going to sell me this idea. We really care about Iranians, so we're going to bomb them with a nuke. I cannot, I don't understand. We really care about spiders, so we're going to use raid and kill all those. Can you follow this? What logical person could?
It's like King George in the Hamilton musical, where he's like, I will
kill your friends and family to remind you of my love. Yes.
Right. I'm going to send a fully armed battalion to remind you of my love. Like, that's what it sounds like. Lindsey Graham will come save you.
I'm going to have to. That sounds hilarious and very accurate.
Right.
Yeah,
so what idiot follows that? Like, oh, yes, we love them. Let's bomb their country for their safety.
If you were to look at X, you would think that millions of idiots follow that. And I wonder if the amount of my video has been getting almost 1 million views, and I've gotten interviews because of it. But I wonder, I see some very fake videos getting 60,000 views, and it turns out it's a bunch of men throwing Molotov cocktails in the street, tens of Molotov cocktails, and you think, whoa, this is chaos. It turns out it's from Greece from a month ago. And I'm like, okay, why didn't I hear about these riots in Greece a month ago? Why isn't that all over the news? This seemed like it was huge. It seemed like it was a regime change, world-ending thing that we never even heard about, but we're hearing about it now because it's being applied to Iran.
Well, Mossad and the CIA are working overtime in these propaganda campaigns. I mean, we spoke to a CIA whistleblower who said, the CIA has an entire division devoted to this, to pushing these videos out. Mossad, I mean, we know now under Netanyahu, they are actively working with the CIA in pushing out fake news and fake social media accounts and fake videos. So they'll have accounts that are a year old, and they'll use those accounts and they'll push out these fake videos. And so the bot army is very, very strong right now, pushing for this war.
And I wonder if American lives are going to be affected because of this war, because I think that Israel cannot fight this war with Iran by itself. Last time we saw the U.S. intervene, and this time Iran has said that if the U.S. intervenes, they will retaliate at U.S. Positions. They, of course, they have their fleet in the Persian Gulf, and they have been affected previously. Look at Iraq when the U.S. assassinated Soleimani, General Soleimani. The Iranians completely decimated a U.S. military base. It was actually occupied by the U.S. military, but it was built by Saddam Hussein, Al-Assad Air Base. And while the airbase was flattened, the only reason people survived was because they hid in a bunker that was built by Saddam Hussein to sustain airstrikes from the United States. So, so Iran is capable of inflicting damage. They just chose to avoid targeting the U.S. because they know that the real hand behind this whole is Israel. And this is not a beef between them and the United States.
Yeah. So Yeah, we got to wrap it. I want to get you out of here. Thank you. You've been so gracious with your time. I want to go back real quick on one thing you said. Your sources in the Middle East are telling you that war is coming to Iran by the end of the month, and we have heard separately here at Redacted from sources in Israel, um, who have told us the very same thing, the 30th or the 31st of January. And of course, President Trump likes to, when he wages one of these wars, likes to start it or on a Friday night into a Saturday morning when the markets are closed. That would be the 30th of January, 31st of January. So that's what you're hearing as well?
That or before that.
All right, Doctor. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. Thanks for your boots on the ground experience.
Welcome back. We are joined today by Professor Said Mohammed Marandi, a professor from Tehran University and also a former advisor to Iran's nuclear negotiation team. So thank you for coming back on.
Hi, Glenn. Thank you very much for having me. It just shows how much I like your show because I went through a lot of trouble to get online.
Well, I appreciate it very much. And I guess what you're referring to is the internet connections in reference to the different riots which have been going on in different cities in Iran, including Tehran then. It does seem, though, that every time there's a build-up to another regime change operation or invasion, it almost every time follow the exact same script, though. That is, first you destabilize the society with sanctions and an information war. Then you build on the grievances of the public and instigate violent protests. You announce the intention to help or support the locals in their aspirations for freedom against their own government, of course. And the rhetoric is always dumbed down to a binary choice. Either you don't care about the struggle for freedom and the aspiration of brave protesters, or you support the sanctions and or military intervention. So, and after the coup or invasion, it turns out the US and its allies actually had some zero-sum geopolitical interest and power interest, as opposed to solely acting out of altruism and the love of freedom. But almost every time, the result is always the same from the Arab Spring and onward. That is, the country which was to be liberated is instead destroyed. So we've all seen this movie before, which is why it's my position that Iranians can of course protest the government all they want, but this is an internal Iranian issue, and as soon as it becomes an international issue, then you can't really keep the geopolitics out. But sorry for the very long prelude to the question. So, how do you assess, though, the situation now there on the ground in Tehran? What are the domestic grievances, and what is the geopolitical component here?
Well, first I should point out that every once in a while, every few years, the West, Western media, Western pundits, think tanks, leaders say that Iran is on the verge of collapse. And every time people like myself come and say that it's not going to happen, the state has popular support, the constitution is something that a very strong majority of Iranians adhere to, and your assessments are based on wishful thinking. And every single time, they'll say you're a mouthpiece for a dying regime or something like that. And then it goes, it's like a loop. It goes over and over every 2, 3 years, 3, 4 years, 4, 5 years. Now, what's happening now is that basically we had a sudden fall in the currency. I don't know what percent, but let's say 40, 50% item in a somewhat brief period of time, maybe 30%. I'm not sure because I don't follow the currency rate. But it was a surprise fall. And it turns out that it was managed from abroad. In other words, the United States and its Western allies put pressure on those places that do currency exchange with Iran. So for a period of time, there was a lot of difficulty. Then, because the currency dropped significantly, we had in Tehran and some other places protests, not very large, few thousand, I guess. Again, I don't know the numbers, but let's say a few thousand. And they were peaceful. And why were they protesting? They're basically business people who had shops, who bought and sold. And their argument was that, look, if you don't stabilize the currency, we're going to go out of business because we sell goods and then suddenly the price goes up and we can't buy new goods to put in our shops. You know, that to put it simplistically, because that's my because I'm not an economist. The protests went on peacefully. No one was arrested. No one was hurt. The police did not intervene. Nothing happened. And then we saw day two. On day two, the protests continued. Probably the same number of people, maybe a bit more, maybe a bit less in Tehran. Not in most cities, but in maybe a couple of the bigger cities. Then we had infiltration. Suddenly, we had these small groups of people, and we had this 4 years ago as well. Small groups of people, very well disciplined, very well organized, began to infiltrate the protests and began rioting. And they were very violent. Over the past few days, over 100 officers of the law have been murdered. Some of them have been beheaded or burned alive or smashed, their faces and heads smashed by these people. So in the United States, we have a case where sorry, someone came and says, "Oh, internet okay?" And I say, "Yes, it's fine." So in the United States, you had the case of a woman being shot in the head by an ICE official or officer, and we saw what happened in the United States. Here, and the argument goes that she was about to run him down or run over him. And the argument is whether she pulled to the right or not, or how enough, or, They murdered over 100 officers of the law. They burned alive a young woman who was inside a clinic. She was a nurse. They burned down the building. She went to the top floor, but she still couldn't escape. They burned down they murdered a person from the Red Crescent. They murdered a lot of people, ordinary people on the streets, a 3-year-old girl. Lots of people, they died. No one knows how they died. A surgeon told me that a lot of the injuries that he's dealt with, because he was I don't know what it's called in English, but I guess a trauma surgeon or something like that. Anyway, he deals with these things. He said that in his hospital, someone else, another physician also said this, that people were shot with handguns, pistols, and at short range. And it was clear that these people were not just burning down buildings, they burned down many public buses, they destroyed many what do you call them? Sorry, ambulances, but also fire engines. They burned down many buildings. The damage that they caused across the country in just in 3-4 days is massive. And they were very vicious. Now, in the West, they can claim that these are peaceful protesters and they can ignore all the footage that people are putting out. And Western media, of course, is ignoring all of it. But today, Monday, across the country, we had demonstrations protesting against the rioters, against the terrorists. and in support of the Islamic Republic of Iran and the Constitution. Anyone can go and look at the footage. These protests were across the country in every single city. So people could not, it wasn't as if people go from one city to another and gather in one place. Each city has its own. So people can look at the crowds in Isfahan, in Tabriz, in Ahvaz, in Mashhad, and anywhere. And they were unbelievably large. And in Tehran, probably from what I've seen, this is the largest gathering of people that we've ever had before, quite possibly. So people can't deny what was shown on television. They can go to, they can go to Press TV, the Press TV Twitter account. My Twitter account has a couple. Whenever I get into a studio, since I don't have internet, so we can only get Iranian websites right now. So when I want to do a tweet, when I come to a studio, quickly do it, and then when I go out, I can't do it anymore. So because I don't have my own connection for the time being, just like everyone else. But the point is that despite all the riots and despite the enormous propaganda, you have this media empire in Persian, based in Western countries that include many TV channels. Some say in the hundreds. I don't know. I don't watch them. They have, infinite number of websites, Twitter accounts. They have Twitter armies. They have online armies. They have bots. They have everything, and Telegram channels. Everything. They outgun the Iranian state media by far. And I assume every year billions of dollars are invested in it because they pay for 3,000 or 4,000 people in Albania who are in a camp there, who day and night they're on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and whatever else there is out there. I only have a Twitter account. Everything else has been shut down by my Facebook account and Instagram. So I only have Twitter. I don't know much about the other platforms. But in any case, the point is they're spending billions of dollars a year on psychological warfare, and they try to create economic hardship. That's what the maximum pressure sanctions are. And then today you have these crowds on the streets, and Western media tries to hide the facts that many millions of people are on the streets today. Many millions. I don't know the numbers, but many millions across the country.
Well, there's
And no one has to take my word for it. They can just go through the footage, city after city. Just look at the crowds and assess for themselves if this is something that happens in their countries or not.
Yeah, I've seen those marches as well, the protests, in support of the government. And they're huge indeed. I haven't seen them on our news channel here yet, though, in Europe, but maybe they're
Don't bet on it being shown on any of them.
Yeah. Again, there's a narrative control being asserted here, and as you said, it's painting a government as illegitimate for the purpose of toppling it, destroying it, and the people now speaking out the loudest, empathy for the Iranian people. It's hard to take it seriously because these are the same people who just bombed Iran recently and are all for bombing it again, and now, of course, seeing Iran as an obstacle for geopolitical interest in the region. So this idea that you can just point to some protesters on the street saying, well, these are the real freedom-loving Iranians, and we have to do everything we can to support them. It's not genuine. I mean, one can support or be opposed to the government Iran, irrespective of that. None of this coverage is authentic or genuine. But what do we know about the involvement, though, of foreign intelligence agencies in Iran to stoke these things? I know that it's, in some parts in the media, they say, well, this is just normal Iranian propaganda. However, we do see that Mike Pompeo, the former director of the CIA and under Trump, the former Secretary of State, he tweeted, Happy New Year to every Iranian in the street, also to every Mossad agent walking beside them. So we should be worried that the former director of the CIA is participating in Iranian propaganda, or, it's not, it's become, I think, common knowledge accepted by most. But how, do you have any information or revelations in terms of the extent to which foreign intelligence agencies are involved in terms of trying to destabilize the country?
Well, a number of things. One is that, um, if you, in the rally in Tehran, which I'm sure was well over 1 million people. I don't know what the numbers were, but it was just extraordinary. But if you go and speak to these people, they don't have one political view. Some of them are pro this administration, some are opposed to it, some are, they have differing views altogether. Some are of one political persuasion, some are of another. Um, the point is that they support the Constitution and the legitimacy of the state. And they're willing to go to a great deal of trouble to support it, because you've been to Tehran. Just get it. Today was not a holiday. Just getting there and going back takes hours. And many of the people who participated come from work, or they have to go back to work. And it's a huge city. In other words, I mean, it's not like me, like a university, an academic. You know, my salary is significantly higher than a factory worker or many other people. So they, in order to get there, they're spending a whole day effectively to take a stand, to state their position, to make it known that they are against this terrorism, against these riots, and against U.S. Uh, and Western domination over our country. It's not, in the smaller cities, it's easier to get to the protests. In Tehran, just getting there is harder than participating in the protests, and getting back is also a challenge in itself. So people are making a clear statement. With regards to foreign interference, I think it's clear as day, not only with regards to what Pompeo said, but also Mossad in, I think, in the Persian language account that they have. They also spoke of their agents being involved in Iran. And also a number of Israeli officials have spoken on Israeli TV and said more or less the same. But just to prove a point, the reason why they brought down the internet in Iran, they shut it down, was because these rioters were all being coordinated, and they're from different groups. They're ISIS, they're the Mujahideen Khalq, a terror organization based in Europe. They're the monarchists. They're the Komole, which is a Kurdish terrorist group. And all these different groups were active, killing people, destroying clinics, destroying banks, destroying private automobiles, destroying private houses. Real madness. And some of these people, by the way, were taking drugs, and there's footage of it. I may have tweeted one of those, one of where some lady is passing things out those. But in any case, these extremely violent people, when the internet went out, suddenly it collapsed. Suddenly it all collapsed. Why? Because they could no longer organize. Across the country it collapsed. So that's why we don't have internet. That's why I came all the way. I went to the rally and I got stuck in traffic. Went there, walked around for an hour and a half, went back home, got stuck in traffic, and then came all the way from that side of the city to this studio. So I had to come all the way, like an hour drive, just to get internet, so I could speak with you. There's no internet for ordinary people unless someone has like Musk's whatever it's called. So when they cut off the internet, suddenly the network collapsed. And as I said, that's because there's this huge network that is nationwide and that has been active in different parts of Tehran and in different parts of major cities and in different cities across the country. It suddenly fell apart. Why? Because they were no longer able to coordinate with their paymasters abroad. And of course, those who were arrested, uh, many of them had guns. They were shooting from within crowds at the police. As I said, some people, it seems, were being shot from within the crowd. It reminded me of the Maidan, if you recall, in 2014, when the people who were behind the coup, they were shooting both at the police in Kiev or Kyiv, depending on who controls the city next year. We'll have to decide then what the name of the city will be. But they were shooting both at the police and they were shooting at the people on the streets. Why? Because they wanted more deaths. But as I said, I think the uh, someone like Pompeo, when Mossad itself gives out a Persian statement saying that we're on the ground in Iran, why should we need to prove anything? They're the ones who are boasting about it.
That's fair enough. It's well, I saw that Trump, he gave one of the speeches on his plane, when which he made the claim that Iran had called yesterday and they want to negotiate. Again, it sounds like a hostage situation where they're almost claiming responsibility for what's happening on the ground in Iran. So yes, Iran wants to negotiate, but I guess there's something to this. Is this about? I mean, is this about another nuclear deal? Is it about reducing Iran's deterrent in terms of its conventional ballistic missiles? Is it about Iran's support for its partners in the region? What is it that the United States want to negotiate this time?
Well, no one contacted him. And his ignorance about the situation, Glenn, which I think you should really take note of this, and so should your audience. He said, or he tweeted or uploaded on his Truth Social account, I suppose, that the second largest city in Iran had fallen to the protesters or the freedom fighters or the rioters or whoever it is that I don't know what he called them. Which city? When? Who took it? Not a town, not a village was taken by anyone. If his information, if his knowledge of the situation on the ground is so poor, then who's giving him intelligence? Who's feeding him knowledge about events inside the United States, events in Ukraine, events in Venezuela? He said, I don't know if you've been outside of Tehran. I think he was alluding to the city of Mashhad. The city of Mashhad, I don't know how large it is. It's must be 3-4 million. I don't know, maybe 3.5 million people. That would be a very big deal. That would be enormous. But he just says it and then it's finished. Either he just retweets stuff, or that's where or he believes it. I don't think he just. I think he probably believes what he's being told, or he's watching it on Fox News. I don't know where he gets that information. But the point that I'm trying to make is that the head of the United States is utterly ignorant about basic facts. And when someone is so ignorant about basic facts, then his actions, his decisions, his policies are all going to be founded upon uh, on something that's absolutely incorrect, and they're all going to fail. So what does Trump want? Trump wants, if you recall, during the 12-day war, he also tweeted, and again, I'm using tweet in a loose way. I don't know, was it True Social or where it was, but he tweeted that, what was it? He said, what do you call it when someone has to surrender?
Capitulates. No.
No, he used the term like complete surrender. Iran has to surrender, and the country has to surrender. Well, why does he do that? I mean, based on what? Who's giving him that sort of knowledge? Who's telling him that Iran is in such a bad situation? And then it turns out that, as you know, by the end of the war, it was the Israelis were begging for a ceasefire. So absolute surrender, I think. I think that's what he tweeted. But in any case, um, I think what he wants is whatever the Israeli regime wants. And what does the Israeli regime want? He wants a broken West Asia and North Africa. He wants a fragmented West Asia. He wants to destroy uh, nation states. And I have no doubt that the Israeli regime ultimately, if it had the opportunity, would do the same to Saudi Arabia as it did to Syria. It would do the same to Egypt, and it would do the same to Turkey. And the foolishness of Erdogan is that he helped bring about this arrogance among Israeli regime leaders by helping, along with the Qatari regime, uh, who both of them, of course, under the umbrella of U.S. Policy, Obama policy of Operation Timber Sycamore, they destroyed Syria, and thus they have empowered the Israeli regime on that particular front. But so Erdogan thought he's going to sort of create a mini Ottoman Empire. Now he's he has borders with the Israeli regime, and obviously the Israeli regime has the upper hand because at the end of the day, what Erdogan never calculated was that his ally and in the White House is always going to choose the Israeli regime over him and his country any day of the week and whenever. So what the Israelis they would like to see a broken Turkey or Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, and of course Iran. But I think again they simply don't understand Iran. As I said at the beginning of the program, every 2, 3, 4 years they say Iran is about to fall. And by the way, the whole woman life freedom thing, it was the same thing. It was all fake. Mahsa Amini was taken into a police station, rightly or wrongly. That's not the point. And then she died. She collapsed. And then BBC Persian in these, as I said, this empire of media, Persian media in the West, they began claiming that she was beaten and battered to death. And a lot of people believed it. Now, after 3 days or so, they put out the footage showing that she was completely okay and that she was not hurt. And then she just fell, and it came out that she had a precondition. She had an operation when she was a child. In any case, and the autopsy also showed none of this. I was on LBC or something a few days ago, and the host was saying, no, there was a UN investigation carried out in Iran. He said, well, name the people in the investigation, the people on the team. She was just making it up. So, but back then they used the same psychological warfare, and they created push for riots, and then we had the same process. So some people believed that she was beaten, so they came to the streets and protested, significantly larger than what the economic protests we had last week. But those were peaceful too. The first couple of days were peaceful, and then we had the infiltration, and it became violent. But so back then they're also saying Iran is about to fall, and then people came to the streets. This time, people came to the streets in a way in which I have never seen, or at least I don't recall. So every 3 or 4 years, but this time, hopefully, it's going to be the last, because I think the empire is declining so fast that they're not going to have the ability in 3 or 4 years' time to do anything to the Iranian people again, like they've been doing over the past 47 decades.
It is a dangerous thing, though, when I was going to say it's very dangerous when one falls for one's own propaganda in this way. But we often see that this is what happens during conflicts, because there's a similar thing happened in 2014. That is after Russia took back Crimea. At that time, President Obama came out and he rejected the Russian reasoning, because the Russians had said, well, you took Kosovo. They were allowed to secede without the permission of the country, so why shouldn't Crimea? And Obama's reasoning was, well, you can't compare it, because in Kosovo there was a referendum. You had a lot of international observers, and observing the referendum, making sure it's legitimate. It goes into details almost about how it was carried out. And at the end of it, there never was a referendum in Kosovo. They just, but my point is, no journalist could point that out. Like, wait a second, that never happened, because then you're backing the narrative of Russia, and you can't do that. So it becomes like the moral obligation of every Western journalist to just pretend as if they didn't hear this, or pretend there was a referendum in Kosovo. And you see the same with the Ukraine war. Whenever something happens, and what the Russians are saying is true, but it doesn't make Trump or the U.S. or NATO look good. It's just, well, let's just go with it. And after a while, it discredits oneself. But I was going to say with Mossad, the idea that this city has fallen. This is the problem of think tanks and all. If you can control the information to the politicians, then you don't really need to control the politicians, just the people who whisper into their ears. But the question is always, though, is it Trump who's manipulating his base when he says the second largest city in Iran has fallen, or is Trump manipulated by his handlers? Or, it could just be stupidity. I mean, I've seen Trump on more than one occasion claim that Maduro has killed millions of people. That's quite an achievement for a country the size of Venezuela. But it is a
it sort of
perplexing.
offends me, because we should be the ones who kill the most. I mean, we're the evil, and the Iranians are the most evil of them all. So it's offensive for us for Maduro to get to the highest number of murders in the U.S. ranking system. No, you're absolutely correct. It's in the case of Iran, it's worse than Russia or China, and why? Because Iran supports Palestine. That's been the issue all along for almost 5 decades. And Iran sacrifices for the Palestinian people, and it's been doing it for decades. And despite all the, like Qatar and others and all these oil and gas rich dictatorships promoting sectarianism and tried to create hatred for Iran over the decades, and while the West has been always demonizing Iran, people are now seeing the truth. And what does this say, Glenn? What does it say about Iran, which after all these economic sanctions, which after all this antagonism, with this empire of anti-Iranian Persian media out there in the West, and with these rioters that are funded by the West and in Western intelligence agencies all working with them, because Mossad doesn't work alone. It's the CIA, it's MI6, it's French intelligence. All of them are in bed together. The Western embassies in Tehran, in our neighboring countries, they're all in it together. But what does it say about the Islamic Republic of Iran that despite all that, if they ask people to come to the streets, you will see people come in these numbers? Which country can do that? Can France do that? Can can Macron do that? Can the British Prime Minister do that? Can the Chancellor of Germany do that? That shows a high degree of legitimacy. But in the West, they do not want to accept Iran as legitimate, because that destroys their whole notion of supremacism, that they are superior to the rest of us, that they have special privileges and rights, that they're more civilized than the rest of us. Of course, that narrative is being demolished because we've seen the genocide going on in Gaza. And there's no difference between Trump and AOC. AOC put out a tweet yesterday saying that we should support the people of Iran. In other words, what? Intervention? More sanctions? The sanctions are all directed at ordinary people. We know that. But the United States is already at war with women and children in Iran. But what is AOC saying? She is trying to push Trump towards war, towards further confrontation. This is a uniparty. There's no difference between any of them. Maybe over some abortion issues, or maybe over taxation. But when it comes to the empire, they're all the same. AOC is one of the leaders of the Democratic Party, and she's supposedly a progressive, and many of the progressives that you and I know and respect supported her. And this is what she's saying now. So the uniparty, it is basically out there to preserve the empire, but the empire is falling apart. Yet at the end of the day, these people won't think about it, but others should. Then how is it that today, on Monday, so many millions of people in Iran came to the streets to say, we support the state, we support the constitution, we support Ayatollah Khamenei, and we support Iran's policies, and we condemn the United States, the Israeli regime, and the West, and those who support the rioters? What does that say about Iran, and what does that say about Western regime and media and think tank narratives about Iran?
And even if one wanted to stimulate more open society, usually attacking a country is not the way to go. I mean,
about open societies.
Yeah.
The first day of the protests, there was no violence. There was no. But in the UK, if you hold a placard, if an 85-year-old Jewish woman holds a placard saying I'm against genocide, she goes to jail. In Berlin, they'll batter them just because they wear a keffiyeh, symbolizing the Palestinian people. In Iran, the police only got involved after the violence became violent, and they were murdering police officers. And we have footage of them murdering police officers. We have lots of footage. They burned 2 young men in a mosque. They trapped them inside and started throwing Molotov cocktails, and they burned them alive. Or that woman nurse. So the West is in no position to talk about open society. Iranian society is far more open than the West. And the West, are carrying out a genocide. In Iran, they're opposing the genocide. In the West, they arrest people for opposing genocide in Palestine. In Palestine, not even, it's not even about their own country. What they've done to university students in the United States, the list goes on. I mean, the facade, the pretense that they were a free and open society, that's all gone. No one believes it. Western media has been looking away as the genocide's been going on. It's been pretending that this is the riots in Iran are peaceful and that millions of people were supporting it. Now, when we have millions of people on the streets in Tehran saying no to the West, they're all looking away again. That's not a free society. That's not a democratic society. That's not a free press. That's just a facade.
Regarding what you said about AOC, though, it reminded me a bit about a statement by the first president of Tanzania. He said that the United States is also a one-party state, but with the typical American extravagance, they have 2 of them. So I thought that was a interesting quote. My last question, though, is where, of course, this could be heading, because as we know, with all previous similar cases of trying to destabilize a country, the goal here is obviously not as altruistic as the rhetoric would suggest. Instead, we heard from Israel and some voices in the United States that war may be in the cards. Indeed, only yesterday, Lindsey Graham, the U.S. senator, suggested that they might strike Iran well last night or today, so that it's imminent, an attack on Iran. But yeah, so bombing Iran to help its people. This is the rhetoric logic we're going with. But how likely do you see a war coming now?
Well, that was what this whole thing was about from the beginning. They manipulated the currency in order to create unhappiness, unrest, and then their highly trained teams, very well trained. The police have been saying that this is not like anything they've seen before. Their teams went out and systematically started destroying property and killing people. So this was all about creating, I don't know, instability in Iran, or at least a narrative of instability in Iran. Let's say that would be more accurate, to legitimize strikes against the country. And that's why the CIA and Mossad and others are doing this. They're trying to create the justification for war. But Iran is prepared for war. And after the protests that we saw today, people are behind the scenes, just like during the 12-Day War. These people who carried out the riots, they were not with the people during the 12-Day War. They were opposed. They were on the other side. They are a small minority. But after today, if the United States strikes, these are the people who are going to be steadfast and standing firm when Iran strikes back. And Iran may strike first if Iran sees that there's some sort of imminent threat. That's a new policy. The Iranians have said that we may actually carry out, if we feel threatened, we can carry out a strike initially before they do. Because Trump has threatened Iran, and the Israeli regime has already carried out a blitzkrieg attack. So Iran today is much more prepared for war. Ironically, the last 10 days have turned out to strengthen Iran rather than weaken Iran. It's made the population united and angry at these rioters and terrorists and the Westerners behind them, because they've caused a lot of death and grief and damage. So I think that the whole objective from day one, which began with the currency manipulation, was to create an environment to justify war. And that's what Trump would do. Like, the Americans would bomb and kill tens of thousands of Iranians or hundreds of thousands of Iranians in an ideal world for them, to support these protesters. But in reality, what will happen is that Iran will hit back the Americans so hard and across the board that it will bring down the global economy, and it will bring down the U.S. economy. And some people in the West say, that's not going to happen. Well, we'll see. We'll see. Iran's capabilities defeated Israel. Anyone can go look at what Steve Bannon said the day after the ceasefire. He said that the real story is that Netanyahu and the Israeli regime were desperate. They were being hit hard, and they needed the ceasefire during the last 3 days, 4 days, whatever. Today, Iran is much more prepared, but more importantly, Iran's capabilities at hitting the Israeli regime, which are much more significant today than they were 7 months ago, that is a sideshow. Iran's real capabilities are not directed at the Israelis. They're directed at the Americans. They're directed at the Persian Gulf, the Indian Ocean, the other side of the Persian Gulf. Why? Because for 3 decades, the Americans have been saying all options are on the table. So Iran has for 3 decades been preparing itself for war with the United States. And so Iran has many underground drone and missile bases, short-range missiles, medium-range missiles, which are much more easy to move around and fire than these long-range missiles, and much more in number. So Iran can swiftly devastate anything that's out there, very swiftly. And under circumstances where the United States wants to wage war on Iran, Iran is not going to hold back. The Americans struck Iran once, and Iran destroyed key U.S. installations in Doha with 6 missiles that struck the base. The Americans denied it, if you recall, initially, but then the footage came out. the Americans want to go for war, it's not going to be like that. The Iranians are going to go all out. And the Speaker of Parliament said that today. And he said it also in Parliament, I think, yesterday. So that, I think, was the objective. And I think that's what the Zionists and the neocons want. But ultimately, if it happens, it will destroy Western economies. It's not something that we want. It's not something that any sane person wants. But the States, the West, is in the hands of the Zionists. When AOC and Trump are saying the same thing, there's a reason for that. Because the people who really have influence and power are telling them to say the same thing.
Yeah, I do get the impression as well that if they decide to go on another war against Iran, and it's looking increasingly likely, then it will play out very different this time. But you actually think as well that
And
Iran
also,
could
Glenn,
preempt?
just one thing. Iraq, if there's war in Iran, Iran's allies in Iraq will take out Americans. And Iran's supporters in Azerbaijan, they will not remain quiet. The same is true in Yemen. This is not a war that the Americans can win. They don't have a chance in the world. And this is not the United States of 20 years ago. And this Iran is not Iraq. Iran is not even Vietnam. So, but again, the Zionists don't, because they're Israel first. They don't care about American interests. They want war because it's in the interest of the Israeli regime. They don't care about the results and how it could devastate Europe and the United States and the entire world.
Well, Professor Marandi, thank you for taking time, and you had to travel across town to get to the studio, so I very much appreciate it.
See, Glenn, when I say always a pleasure, always an honor, I'm always telling you the truth, because I get it. Getting them to let me into this building to do this interview, to use the internet, crossing town, just shows what a great show you have.
Well, we very much appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Always thank you for accommodating my schedule. Before we get to the CIA and whoever else is collaborating with them or has been collaborating with them in Iran, I want you to take a look at what President Trump posted on his Truth Social. Is Donald Trump the acting president of Venezuela, or is he out of his mind?
Well, he thinks it's like those children, 4 or 5 years old, who pretend that they're doctors and nurses and policemen and cowboys. He's kidding himself. We saw over the weekend, on Saturday, to be precise, that the State Department, through the exiled embassy of Venezuela, so the U.S. embassy that's supposed to be in Venezuela is not in Venezuela because it's not safe. Instead, it's operating out of Bogota, Colombia, next door. And that embassy issued basically a warning to all Americans: get the hell out of Venezuela. It's too dangerous. The militias are running around with arms. Well, that warning wasn't the idea of the embassy in Venezuela. That came from Maine State, from Marco Rubio and his team. And that means they have intelligence that is credible, that they don't think that they can counter it. In other words, they've got information about potential threats to Americans that the United States can't do anything to stop. And so the next action is warn Americans, get the hell out. I was at the creation of that policy back in 1989, 1990. It was a reaction to the bombing of Pan Am 103 that blew up over Lockerbie. Anyway, uh, we're not in control on the ground. The government of Venezuela is still intact. There are armed militias in addition to the army and the intelligence services. So the United States has no control over the ground. And, as I discovered when I started doing some research, this entire notion that we went there for the oil, nonsense. Or if that's the real reason they went, boy, they went for something that's not going to pay off. Because right now, Venezuela's production accounts for 2%, only 2% of all OPEC production. And as Alistair Crook correctly noted in your earlier discussion with him, what comes out of the ground is, it's not Jed Clampett in the Beverly Hillbillies, where he shoots a rifle in the ground and up comes a bubbling crude. No, this stuff is thick. It's as Pepe Escobar talked about. It's like tar. It's very thick. It has to be pulled out of the ground. It doesn't want to leave on its own. And if they go ahead and give Trump his 50 million barrels, it's going to take Venezuela 71 days to produce that. And if Trump thinks that's going to change the price of oil, that amount of oil that would be pumped in those 71 days would account for less than 1/2 of 1% of global oil. So, I mean, it's just Trump he's off in never land.
He just does not have a realistic understanding of the oil business and Venezuela's relationship to it. Is it any wonder? Now, of course, he hates ExxonMobil. That the CEO of ExxonMobil said, we're not going to invest any money there, and Venezuela is uninvestable.
Yeah, it's going to take the estimate about 100 to get 1 million barrels of oil. You're going to have to invest basically $100 million. And so just these are businessmen. These are not ideologues. They're looking at how do we increase our profits, minimize our costs. And ExxonMobil's they're not playing that game. And if Trump again, this is the hallmark of Donald Trump. He's a bully, and he's an ignorant bully on top of it.
So the president says he is only constrained by his own mind, his own morality. He doesn't need international law. So it's a brief clip. We'll play it, and then I'll finish with the question, Larry. Chris, cut number 2.
Do you see any checks on your power on the world stage? Is there anything that could stop you if you wanted to?
Yeah, there's one thing, my own morality, my own mind. It's the only thing that can stop. And that's law. Very good. I don't need international law. I'm not looking to hurt people.
What moral principle justified the invasion of Venezuela and the abduction of Mr. and Mrs. Maduro?
Well, he's taken us back to Hobbes, Thomas Hobbes. It's those who are the strongest. They get to make the rules and coerce and force everybody else to conform to what they want. I mean, it's just this takes us back to the early days when kings could declare life, death, what was right, what was wrong, and it was only it was out of England that the first successful attempt to constrain the power of the monarch. That's where it began, and inherent in that was this notion that there are certain fundamental rules that govern human beings that should be abided by, that no government can take to itself and claim that it is the only arbiter. I mean, that's enshrined in our Constitution. It's enshrined in the Declaration of Independence.
We call it the natural law. Everybody in their hearts knows that certain things are right and certain things are wrong. But this Trump doctrine is, they have it, we want it, we'll take it.
Yeah, and it is going to produce. It's not producing the results that he thinks. I mean, for example, he thinks he's in charge and in control of what's going on the ground in Venezuela, but as we noted, the U.S. is issued a travel advisory telling Americans get the hell out. It's too dangerous. Well, if we're controlling the situation there, why is it so dangerous? The fact is, we're not controlling it. All we've succeeded in doing is kidnapping Nicolas Maduro, and I anticipate that it's not going to be a slam dunk legal case against him. There are so many holes in that indictment, at least the initial one he was charged on, that his defense team is going to have a field day with the Department of Justice that I think was guided more by ideological fervor than actual law.
It's sloppy, poorly crafted, and there are allegations in there that couldn't possibly be crimes, like the possession of a machine gun in Caracas. It may be illegal in Miami, but how can a federal court prosecute somebody it may be illegal in Manhattan? How could a federal court in Manhattan prosecute somebody for something they did in Caracas?
Yeah,
Shipping
absolutely.
cocaine from Caracas to Paris. What does that have to do with the United States federal law? There's a variety of those in there. As we transition in our conversation, Larry, to Iran, a lot of folks have been asking about your and my colleague, Professor Morandi. So I want everybody to know he is well. Chris, my producer, just chatted with him. He will be on Judging Freedom on Wednesday at 10 a.m. Our Eastern time. That is assuming that the internet is working. Is CIA and its colleagues, MI6 and Mossad, trying to foment another color revolution in Iran?
Yes. Yeah. No. Absolutely. Look, as I've commented previously, this started on December 28th, in anticipation, one day before the visit of Bibi Netanyahu to Mar-a-Lago, in which on the agenda, Trump and Netanyahu were discussing what was going to happen with Iran, and this plan that was presented. They discussed this covert operation there because it's a combination of CIA and Mossad. CIA has had long-standing relations with the Kurds, and there are Kurds in Iran up on the northwest border of where Iran and Iraq come together. And so you work with Kurdish elements, and then out in the far east of Iran, you've got the Baluchis, and there are elements there, and then there are people in Iran that don't like the Islamic Republic, and the fact that the United States has been working with this other group called the MEK, the Mujahideen al-Khalq. They've got now sort of a front group. It's called the National Coalition of Iran of Resistance, the NCRI. If you check out a lot of the press reports that were coming out about what was taking place on the ground in Iran, it was the NCRI that was the primary source for that. They were putting out disinformation, propaganda, trying to paint a picture that Iran was on the cusp of a collapse, that the Ayatollah Khamenei was looking to flee like Bashar al-Assad did to Moscow for safety, that it was coming apart. That was the narrative that was being fed. And then you got Trump going, yeah, if they kill any protesters, we're going to go in and respond. Great, talk about it, but there's nothing the United States can do militarily right now, or even in the next 2 to 3 weeks, that would even make it would not defeat the system. What these clowns do not understand is you cannot affect a regime change unless you've got control over the military and or the intelligence services. As long as you've got the folks with the guns that can enforce what the government wants, they'll crack down on these protesters. But what we see is it was a very elegant, a very sophisticated propaganda campaign that has dominated global media over the last now 2 weeks. So it was really 2 weeks ago today was when Bibi Netanyahu was meeting with Trump, and that's when this whole thing started. And these operations, they always start with a grain of truth. I mean, there's genuine upset at the government of Pezeshkian for his mismanagement of the economy. But then you add into that people, these outside groups, which have a more nefarious purpose. And and they incite the crowds. They can create crowds by paying people money, just as we've seen here in the United States. You load up a group of protesters who are, short of cash, they'll show up. But now that the government started cracking down, and they're killing some people, and they're killing people that are shooting at them. And just like, it's sort of the same. It is actually ironic that we've got all of these anti-ICE protests taking place in the United States with, law enforcement killing some of the protesters, or at least one of the protesters so far. And, Iran's just saying, hey, you're pointing the finger at us? Go look in the mirror. Take care of your own house.
Well, Alistair Crook argued that there are mobs and gangs in the cities that are actually fomenting the violence. They'll just pick on an innocent person and beat the daylights out of him, and that foments other violence, and that brings in the Iranian security forces, and then they shoot at the security forces, then the security forces shoot back, and inevitably an innocent person is killed, and some of the security forces are killed, and the thing sort of foments. Meanwhile, in Paris, the Shah's son is planning his return. I would think he'd be crazy to go back to Iran.
No, he's not going back. That's been the plan all along. That the Shah's son, he's not ordained by God to rule Iran. I mean, that's how he thinks, that they've got some inherent that he can trace his heritage, lineage back to ancient Persia, maybe. I mean, this is ludicrous, but this is, it's typical of this CIA operation, and Mossad is definitely involved. Yeah, you gotta have a front guy, somebody you can put out in front that is, he's rallying and mobilizing people. But as Alistair made the point earlier today, it's quite different from Pahlavi is reaching out to some Iranians, but it's not getting people saying, yeah, by God, he's got the vision, he's got the power. We need to follow
That's the
him.
Shah's son's name, Pahlavi.
Yeah, Reza Pahlavi.
Right.
But in contrast, when the Ayatollah Khomeini was in exile in Paris back in the 1970s, he had Jews. He had people that his message resonated with him. He offered a vision. And, that's a big difference. So, but let's understand that this effort to destabilize and destroy the Iranian government, good God. So it started when the Shah took over, when they dumped the Shah, 1980. So we're now 46 years into this. And particularly starting in 2004, when the CIA enlisted the MEC, this group that had been formally identified as a terrorist group by the U.S. government because it had killed Americans in attacks against civilian targets. The United States harnessed the MEC starting in 2004, and they've had camps both in Iraq and in Albania, as Alistair also pointed out, and they've been involved with the assassinations in Tehran of nuclear scientists, some that took place in 2011, 2012. So the United States has been using this terrorist group to try to foment unrest in Iran, and right now it's failed. This latest CIA Mossad effort, it has failed. We're going to continue to get some stories about all their protests, this and protests. Tomorrow morning, you're going to see some of the organizers of this hanging from cranes in Tehran. They're going to hang them. They're going to execute them. While there may be unhappiness and disgust with the government of Pezeshkian for financial mismanagement, there is not that same animus directed at the Ayatollah Khamenei and the Islamic Republic.
Is the tide turning, and are there now pro-regime demonstrations in the streets?
Yeah. In fact, what's interesting is some Western outlets, my friends over at the Gateway Pundit, They put up, said, see, there are millions of people in the street. Yeah, but those millions are chanting in support of the Iranian regime. They're not anti-regime. They just last night, I posted at sonar21.com a video out of Mossad, which is a city about 250 miles northeast of Tehran. And the square was just packed with young men chanting about their support for the Islamic regime. So this, again, the goal of the intelligence operation by CIA and Mossad, create a narrative that can persuade most of the people in the West that Iran is vulnerable, that Iran can be collapsed, that there is no support left for the Islamic Republic. Therefore, when we come to you and tell you we're going to launch a military attack, you'll be with us. That's what this is all about. This is about shaping the perceptions in the West so that we will support future military actions. Problem there, though, is the U.S. military has come back and said, we need some time. What do they need time for? Well, they need time to either harden their bases and develop shelters to protect their personnel, or start removing them from the area. There's no aircraft carrier or carrier task force in the area. They might need one or two of those. We don't have any additional fighter bomber squadrons in the area. So there's a lot of preparation that would have to take place before a new military operation can be carried out. I believe it's going to happen, but it's not going to happen this week or next week. It's too far off.
I mean, do you think that Trump and Netanyahu actually thought that these demonstrators would overthrow the government and save the two of them the cost of an invasion?
Yes, I think they really genuinely believed it. If you're told, yeah, we got this support, and again, remember how Trump gets his information. He watches television. He watches videos. So you see a video of 200 people in a square. Well, that looks like 2,000 people. And then, but when you step back, think about where you live, and if there's one street in the downtown area of the nearest big city where there are 500 protesters, what does that mean for everybody else that's out in the surrounding areas? It goes for miles, nothing. So, but it's this how media, they focus in on it, and then they create this narrative, and then it feeds into social media, then it becomes reality, when in fact it's a relatively small group of people. I don't think total over the course of the last 2 weeks that you had more than 1 million protesters. So people go, what? That's big. That's 1% of Iran's population. Okay, yeah, 1 million people. Gee, I bet we have at least 1 million or 2 million people here, or maybe 30 million people that would be able to get out in the streets and protest Donald Trump. Now, so I mean, it's just we sometimes pass our own expectations and convince ourselves that what we expect to be the outcome is the outcome. When objectively speaking, the Ayatollah was not in trouble, has not been in trouble, and there's nothing that's going on right now that would threaten with the collapse of the Iranian regime.
Oh, but you wouldn't know that to listen to your favorite senator from South Carolina, Larry Johnson.
Yeah.
Here he is, cut number 5, Chris.
I don't care if they extract him, but I want him to be considered. He's the modern day Hitler. He's a religious Nazi. He's a horrible person. It's time for him to go. The people want him to go. Trump has done what Reagan did. Reagan went to the Berlin Wall and said, tear this wall down. Donald Trump picked the people over the Ayatollah. Donald Trump says the best way to make Iran great again is for the protesters to win and the regime to come down. How do you do that? Whatever action we're going to take, Mr. President, needs to embolden the protesters and scare the hell out of the regime. If I were you, Mr. President, I would kill the leadership that are killing the people. You've got to end this. If it ends well, then peace breaks out. All the state-sponsored terrorism activity stops. Hezbollah, Hamas, they go away. Israel and Saudi make peace, a new day in the Mideast. If the Ayatollah hangs on, it's a giant Obama step backward. I have faith in you, Mr. President. I have trust in you. You are the Ronald Reagan plus of our time. End this
All right.
will. Stand with the people, Mr. President. Let them know
Senator,
you're
thank you
going to
so
kill
much.
their oppressors.
Even too much for Maria Bartiromo to put up with.
Revolutionary salute, big bro.
He is an idiot, imbecile, moron. I mean, the things that come out of Lindsey Graham's mouth, you would think with his education and with his life experience that he would have some measure of common sense and judgment. You're likening the Ayatollah Khamenei to Hitler? Really? Last I checked, Hitler was not a religious figure, number one. Hitler was not a religious scholar, number two. And under the tenure of the Ayatollah Khamenei, Iran has not been out attacking other countries. Iran has not been out trying to conquer other countries. Yeah, they provided support to Hamas and Hezbollah because Hamas and Hezbollah are freedom fighters. They're fighting for their freedom. Now, we call them terrorists. And in our narrative, which is dominated by a Zionist mentality, you have to call them terrorists. But from the Iranian perspective, they're freedom fighters, and they're going to support people fighting for their freedom.
Here's another Hitler comparison from somebody that knows or at least knew Donald Trump very well. You'll know who this is as soon as you see him. Chris, cut number 7.
Miller and Trump are fascists. Okay, let's just stipulate that. And they're being unchecked by the U.S. Congress, who is very fearful of him, and they are intimidated by him. And those are the facts.
And he was democratically elected.
And he's, well, so was Hitler. Hitler rose to power on the 30th of January, 1933. He's democratically elected Chancellor of Germany. So what we know about, and by the way, think about what Trump is doing with January 6th. Okay, it's 5 years later. He's revived, and that's what classically what fascists do. But listen, if he loses the midterms, he said something last night that he knows he's going to get impeached because he's got an emoluments clause issue. He's broken the
not profiting from the presidency.
Yeah, he's broken the Constitution. He's done a whole series of things that's going to cause a huge amount of problems for him. So your viewers know he's a fascist, and I know he's a fascist. And so the question is, are you going to check him or not? And if you're going to let 3 more years go with this fascist-like behavior, it's going to be a problem.
What do you think?
Well,
for the record, that was Anthony Scaramucci.
Yeah. The name, just to describe him as a fascist is one thing. The issue I have is we have government institutions that are supposed to check his power, and they're not operating. Neither the Senate nor the House of Representatives are stepping up to do. Well, actually, I take that back. The Senate, at least the other day, did pass a resolution to prohibit Trump from taking additional military action in Venezuela without the consent of the Congress. As it's, the Constitution stipulates that going to war, attacking other countries, that's got to be a decision of the Congress, not of the president. Not just because the president thinks it's a threat, but what we're seeing right now in this presidency of Donald Trump, and this is what we talked about at the outset, a complete disregard of the law. There is no international law as far as he's concerned that governs him. It's a matter of if he thinks it's right, he's going to do it. If he thinks it's wrong, he's going to oppose it. And, there's no objective standard to it. And the fact that he is allowed to get away with this without, because most of the Congress is compliant. They go along with it. And we'll see what the judiciary does.
Larry, thank you very much for your time, my dear friend. We'll look forward to seeing you at the end of the week with the youngster McGovern.
Right, so Israel has started preparing bomb shelters, even
more embassies are quietly pulling people out, and you're being told next to nothing about this because our media are frothing at the mouth at the thought of Iran's ayatollahs falling from power. States don't get civilians ready for incoming fire unless they think incoming fire is on the table. You don't do that as a precaution. You do it because you've already accepted that escalation is plausible enough to hurt your own people, and you're managing the consequences already rather than stopping them. And people are entitled to ask why, and when the media don't answer that, that's a mission by choice, their choice. And once you're at that point, a lot of the language you've been fed instead stops making sense. The reassurances don't work. The denials don't work. The "this is just rhetoric" line doesn't work. The "look at the rioters over there" line doesn't work. Israel doesn't do this sort of thing for fun. And it's Iran in their sights again already, it seems, perhaps using the cover of those riots as it happens. Israeli instigated, as is the accusation there. Mossad agents in amongst them. After all, who else has proven their air defense is insufficient in the past and hit Israel where it hurts? Right, so Israel is reportedly preparing its bomb shelters again. Not talking about them, not floating the idea about doing so. And even if they were, why would they be doing that? They're not running a civil defense drill for show, actually readying them instead. And that matters because bomb shelters are not a deterrent, after all, are they? They're an admission that you're expecting some trouble. They're what you prepare when you believe retaliation is no longer theoretical and when you've quietly decided that escalation is something that you need to survive, not something you're confident you can actually avoid anymore. Well, last time they brought it on themselves, didn't they? So, anyway, this isn't about what anyone says on television right now, or even in the newspapers. States lie all the time. That's nothing new to us, surely. Shelters don't, though. You don't start hardening civilian infrastructure unless you believe something is coming back at you. And that single act by Israel tells you more than a week of briefings ever will. It tells you that somewhere inside the Israeli state, the risk calculation has already shifted from "don't let this happen" to "be ready when it does." Yet at the same time, foreign diplomatic staff are reportedly pulling back. I spoke about US embassy staff being pulled out of Israel the other day in another video, but that's been preceded by Russian staff leaving, and now German embassy staff are apparently packing their bags too. This hasn't happened all at once. It's not happening whilst being heralded with sirens already either, but it's happening quietly in the background, and it's woefully underreported. Surely it's public interest to know that embassy staff from this nation or that nation are pulling out of Israel all of a sudden, and therefore warranting the question being asked by all of us, well, why are they doing that? Where are they going? What's going on? It doesn't happen for the fun of it, does it? Embassies don't pull people out just because someone got a bit jumpy. They do it because someone has looked at the risk and decided staying put just isn't worth it anymore. And that's it. And once that call gets made, things tighten up. There's less room to get things wrong. There's less space for misunderstandings to just sit there without blowing up into something, well, a bit more explosive. So when diplomats start moving, you're not dealing with some distant worst case scenario anymore. You're dealing with a situation where escalation has been accepted as a real possibility and is being managed like a cost already, not being waved away and dismissed with a few words. Iran, for its part, has responded in the only way a state can when it believes that shift has already occurred elsewhere. In this case, they're looking at the US and Israel and half expecting them to attack them again. It's issued formal warnings that any attack will be met with retaliations, taken those warnings into the diplomatic channels that are designed to fix responsibility before the events unfold. It's not chest thumping, that's legal positioning. That's a state saying, if you start something, don't pretend you didn't know what would happen when we fire back. You don't do that if you still think this can be held back either, do you? You do it when you reckon the other side's already planned to move and you're late to it. But once you're there, saying nothing isn't sitting on the fence anymore, it gets taken as going along with it. So you put it on record instead. Not to stop anything, it's gone beyond that point, but just so it's logged before things keep moving anyway. And all of this is happening while things inside Iran have already tipped past shouting into people getting killed. Over 100 police and security staff have been killed in clashes with armed groups that we're being told are just protesters and rioters, right? It's a number that matters. And it's not because you're meant to take sides necessarily in this, but because once it hits that level, the state stops having nice options to deal with it, doesn't it? You're no longer deciding how to manage protest. You're dealing with what you're dealing with at all. Protest, sabotage, something organized, armed. And only one of those still leaves room for politics to continue, doesn't it? Iran's president, Mossad Pezeshkian, has tried to keep that line in place, saying, look, people are angry about the economy. That's one thing. That's fine. You're entitled to be. But arson, shootings, attacks on civilians, Molotov cocktails being lobbed into mosques, that's something else. That isn't weakness. That's an attempt to stop the whole thing collapsing into just another security file, frankly. It's more important than that. But that space disappears fast once the violence all starts lining up with hostile outside actors too, because the cost of getting it wrong goes through the roof, doesn't it? And at that point, being generous stops looking responsible and starts looking reckless. And the targets matter here too. Ambulances burned, mosques attacked. Now, that isn't economic anger spilling over, is it? They're not the right sort of targets for that, are they? That's the kind of thing that makes security systems stop listening and start classifying. Once they decide they're dealing with sabotage instead of dissent, the softer responses don't just look risky, they stop being defensible inside the system, don't they? It's not good enough. It's not strong enough action. Those institutions aren't built to negotiate with something they've labeled an organized threat, aren't they? And it's a shift that doesn't stay inside Iran either. You've already seen that spill outward. In London, worshippers are getting harassed outside an Iran or Iranian-based mosque by regime change demonstrators waving Israeli flags and monarchist symbols, the rising lion Iranian flag of the Shah era. The crowd wasn't huge, but the message was. And once unrest gets wrapped in the flag of a hostile state, along with Israeli flags flying, I might add, well, it stops being read as purely internal, no matter how real the grievances underneath might well be. States don't plan for generous interpretations, they plan for worst cases. And then you've got senior figures in the US openly pouring petrol on that perception. When a former Secretary of State and former CIA director in Mike Pompeo states publicly on social media that Mossad agents are walking side by side alongside Iranian protesters in Iran, well, nobody doing a risk assessment hears witty banter there, do they? They hear confirmation that deniability isn't being protected at all anymore. They're not even denying it anymore. They're so arrogant they don't think it even matters what they say. And perhaps they're right. But when those comments aren't walked back, people are justifiably entitled to wonder whether the news they're being fed is actually news or propaganda instead. And at the same time, US officials are briefing military options that are explicitly tied to unrest, dressed up as support for the protesters. Planning isn't action, but it isn't nothing either. Once you've rehearsed that, once you've priced it in, once you've talked it through, once you put it on the table, it's on the table. And if the table includes options everyone expects to trigger regional retaliation, then escalation has already been accepted as something you might have to live with, along with the costs of that. And when Iran has stated any attack on them will trigger responses against Israel and the US this time, well, that's got to be priced in too. So this is where the language really starts to fall apart. We're told no decisions have been taken. Maybe that's true in the most narrow of technical senses. But it stops meaning much once people are being told to get underground and diplomats are packing their bags. We're told this is about protecting civilians, but governments that are genuinely focused on protecting civilians don't at the same time plan for retaliation, open up bomb shelters, and, well, other friendly states don't start pulling their own people out. Civil defense isn't humanitarianism. It's an admission that harm is expected and the priority is surviving it politically. Nobody backs war with Iran again, so good luck selling that snake oil. But underneath all of this, there's a reality nobody likes to say out loud as well. Iran has got enormous energy reserves, hasn't it? Oil. Iran has the fourth largest oil reserves on the planet. And, well, Venezuela's suddenly become a little bit of a sore point for Donald Trump right now, hasn't it? With oil companies now refusing to go in and extract his oil. That fact has shaped Western behavior for decades, though, from the coup in Iran in 1953 to depose the then Iranian PM Mohammad Mossad, who had dared to nationalize Iran's oil. Well, how dare he take it away from the US? Or up to the 1979 coup that ended Western access to that oil. So regardless of rhetoric about helping protesters, when leaders talk about freedom while also talking about strikes and control, the incentives aren't subtle here. They're baked in. Trump cannot shut up about Venezuela's oil without the liberation of oppressed people there. Now, none of this means someone has already signed an attack order. Of course, that isn't the claim I'm making here. What's already clear is that multiple players are behaving as if the rules have changed. Israel's preparing civilians. Iran is formalizing retaliation warnings. Foreign governments are cutting their own exposure and pulling their people out. Military planners are working through fallout. The quiet disciplines that used to keep things contained are being drowned out by much louder signals here. Each move closes off another path towards de-escalation. So everything is still moving only in one direction and can only end one way, it would seem. Once you're telling people to prepare shelters, walking that back costs you. It's not likely. It's not the sort of thing Trump or Netanyahu would do. It raises questions about judgment and credibility. Once diplomats leave, sending them straight back raises questions about why they went in the first place. Once unrest is treated as being externally encouraged, and the Mossad allegations of driving the riots in Iran are certainly not unfounded, it would seem, pretending it's just a domestic issue is no longer a message you can sell with confidence. And the danger here isn't a single mad decision, it's accumulation. Everyone reacts to what they think everyone else is preparing for, and preparation itself becomes proof of intent. That's how escalation starts running on its own, without anyone ever formally choosing it. Holding back starts to look like weakness. Being cautious starts to look like denial. What's already happened is a shift in how risk is handled. Escalation has been normalized into planning now. Deniability has been weakened by loose talk and symbolism. Humanitarian language no longer matches behavior that assumes civilian harm's manageable. Those conditions are now set, and they shape every move from here on out, whether anything launches tomorrow or the day after that or next week or not at all. Israel's civil defense posture also fixes responsibility ahead of time. Once you prepare civilians and model retaliation, you can't later claim you were caught off guard. Escalation stops being something that just happened to you and becomes something you accepted as a live possibility. Now, that doesn't assign blame for everything that follows, but it does attach responsibility to the environment you helped create. You don't open shelters and then get to act surprised when you get struck. And the same goes for allies pulling back diplomatically too. Embassies don't thin out for show. They do it because someone has decided the risk has now crossed a line somewhere. Once that call gets made, it has consequences of its own too. Fewer diplomats means fewer quiet channels, fewer chances to get things wrong without blowing up, fewer ways to slow things down once momentum builds up. You swap communication for caution. Iran is responding to that reality, not inventing it. And once outside figures openly cheer unrest and reference intelligence services as being involved there, well, Tehran can't afford to treat violence like routine policing without gutting deterrence, can it? And that's why the official language sounds ridiculous when you actually say it out loud. No decisions have been taken, we're told, as if nothing is real until somebody signs a piece of paper. Meanwhile, people are being moved, warnings are being issued, and plans are being rehearsed. We're told this is about helping protesters. Well, every practical step being taken makes regional retaliation more likely instead. The gap between what's said and what's done, it isn't very subtle. It's just very underreported, and I would argue that's very much built into the process too. What's happening isn't about avoiding escalation, it's about managing it. When planners brief options they expect to trigger retaliation, they aren't looking for exits, they're working out how to absorb the hit. That shifts the whole mindset, doesn't it? Civilian harm becomes something to be mitigated, not prevented. Restraint becomes optional, survival becomes the main principle, politically speaking. And there's a familiar pattern here. Pressure campaigns wrapped in humanitarian language tend to slide into coercion once unrest collides with strategic assets. Look at Trump's language towards Venezuela, now having declared himself interim president there, the big orange fool. Iran's energy reserves aren't background noise either. They sit at the center of how instability is read in Washington and Tel Aviv. So when talk of freedom runs alongside talk of strikes and control, you can tell which incentive is doing the heavy lifting here. Inside Iran, the effects are already visible. Security institutions are being pushed towards treating violence as externally encouraged. That doesn't mean every protester is foreign-backed, of course, but enough of them seemingly are. Why would ordinary Iranians attack their own ambulances if they're angry with the government? Why attack mosques? Unrest for unrest's sake makes no sense either, does it? It means the cost of assuming otherwise is too high. So when people start waving Israeli flags at protests abroad, that speeds everything up a bit. Back home, that doesn't get read charitably, it gets read as worst case. It makes it easier for security people to stop hesitating because now it looks external and not just internal. Once it looks like that, the politics gets squeezed out rather quickly. On the Israeli side, you can see the clampdown as well. Everyone suddenly has to clear what they say about Iran. That isn't de-escalation, that's damage control. That's people realizing they've already said too much. And Iran has said saying too much can be taken as a preemptive strike now. That any more noise just makes that box that Israel is sitting in that bit tighter. Silence becomes deliberate, but it doesn't undo what's already been put out there. And put all of that together and all of the diplomatic cushioning disappears. Fewer diplomats, harder security posture, louder talk, shelters becoming the default assumption. None of that guarantees a war. What it does is make mistakes harder to absorb and easier to escalate, though. Their systems only work when there's a bit of slack, room to talk, to misjudge, to quietly walk something back. That slack is being burned off move by move. Once it's gone, pressure doesn't get met with patience, it gets met with force, because there's nothing else left. This isn't war being declared quite yet. It's risk being treated as normal, though. Once leaders plan around retaliation, it gets harder to justify holding back. Preparing makes backing down look expensive and pushing on looks consistent. Right now, people are being sold two stories that don't fit together, that escalation is being avoided and that its consequences are being prepared for as well. One of those has to be false, doesn't it? If escalation isn't likely, then this preparation is just reckless. If it is, then any reassurance is a lie. So the weakness here isn't dramatic, it's administrative. It's wanting room to maneuver without taking ownership of the danger that maneuvering creates. If nothing happens, they take the credit. If it does, they point to the preparations. Either way, the risk has already been pushed outwards. So you don't need bad intentions for escalation here. You just need enough people to decide it's easier to manage the risk than remove it entirely. And that decision has already been made in how everyone is now behaving, whatever they decide to say. But what really stands out is how obvious it's become, because shelters don't lie. Diplomats don't get moved out for show. Military planning isn't a hobby. Those are real choices that lock things in. So at this point, the region isn't organized around stopping escalation. It's organized around living with it. And once you're there, nobody has to want a war. They just have to act like it's already been factored in. And it probably has been, I'm sorry to say. Worst of all is how little this is getting reported, though. Not that the protests in Iran are going underreported, you understand, just overwhelmingly from one angle. And the Mossad ties to those riots go a lot deeper than the mainstream would like you to think. So get more on the details of that side of the story right here. Please do also hit like, share, and subscribe if you haven't done so already, so as to ensure you don't miss out on all new daily content.
Is a potential canary in the coal mine for war on the horizon with Iran is deployment of these special operations forces to the region. Okay, and we've already seen that Delta Force, the group responsible for the kidnapping of President Maduro and Celia Flores, his wife, have deployed to the Middle East. So Delta Force left Caracas. They went to Guantanamo Bay, sent the Maduros on their way to the MDC, to Southern District of New York, and they headed on off to the Middle East. Let me be honest with you. The situation in Iran right now is not great, okay? And I don't just mean the riots. I don't just mean the violence. I don't just mean the chaos every single night. We are going to be talking in depth about these riots in a moment and what's happening. It's not just AI videos. It's not just like all a bunch of fake videos or something like that. It is happening, right? But right now, I want to talk a little bit about the potential of war. Okay, there are a whole host of figures calling for kinetic action. It's their new favorite word, new favorite phrase, rather, to gloss over what is actually going on, right? The bombing of innocent civilians and decapitation strikes to try and overthrow sovereign democratically elected governments. Kinetic action. We need to take kinetic action on Iran, on the mullahs. That's what they say. Now, what's interesting is how do we possibly know if a war is coming? There's a few ways you could possibly know if a war is coming. First of all, if people are outright saying it. That seems to be probably the most clear-cut way to determine if there's a war coming, right? Donald Trump has effectively threatened that now. He gave the green light to Netanyahu during their New Year's Eve meetings. He said if Iran continues to develop their ballistic missile program, then yes, I would support action against Iran, which of course would require U.S. support and logistics and refueling and whatnot. Now, he also said if Iran continues their nuclear program, then yes, we have to hit them, but fast. Absolutely, but fast, he said. So Donald Trump has given the green light. In recent days, Donald Trump has made other threats. You know, he said that if Iran shoots one of these protesters dead on the street, then we will begin bombing Iran immediately. All right. Don't lose sight of the fact, by the way, that federal ICE immigration and custom enforcement officials just shot an unarmed single mother of three illegal observer in the face this week in Minneapolis amid their deployment to Minneapolis. due to the high levels of just slop on X on Twitter that's being pushed by like 19-year-old YouTube Twitter activists, right? So because of all the X slop about Somali fraud and these daycare programs or schools or something like that, these educational programs, Somali fraud allegedly taking place, ICE was deployed, and then they shot a mother in the face the same day in which Donald Trump is saying if any of the Iranian rioters backed by Mossad get shot at as they are committing heinous, violent acts all across the country, the violent acts, burning stuff down, crafting Molotov cocktails, you name it. If any of them are unalived, right, then Donald Trump will then take the appropriate measure to unalive even more Iranians. Does that make sense to you? So Donald Trump hypothetically is so angered that an Iranian who would hypothetically, in this case, be backed by Mossad to do horrible things in Iran, violent things, criminal things, if they get shot at, then Donald Trump is going to kill more Iranians. Doesn't make any sense, right? It's a flawed logic, and it's a logic that only really makes sense if you understand that they are not searching for a red line to be crossed. They have already determined that they will cross that red line. I'm saying that the U.S. has already determined that Iran will cross that red line, and the U.S. will just make it up. They'll just say, oh, you did this, you did that, so we're going to come in and bomb you now. Simple as, right? That's what they're going to do. But the prospects of war in Iran right now are very serious. What are some of the other things that we could potentially expect to see happen if there's a war on the horizon? Well, first of all, the Pentagon, the ever trustworthy Pentagon Domino's Pizza radar is going off the chain right now. If you don't know what I'm talking about, it's like the Pentagon, when they are working 24/7, they order a bunch of like pizzas or something from the Domino's Pizza next by. They have like a website that tracks this, whether or not the Domino's Pizza near the Pentagon is operating at, below, or above normal business levels at certain hours of the day or night, right? So that is a clear indicator, and we've seen that jumping to record highs. I think that Domino's is going to have like a record 4 years under Trump, right? Another thing that we could expect to see are these massive USS carrier strike groups being deployed to the Mediterranean. As of right now, they are still in the Caribbean, which I guess may serve as as justification for the Iranians to have a sigh of relief. But that could change at any point in time. The U.S. has been doing a lot of, obviously, weapon shipments to the region, and there's only one big target that they have in mind right now, which is Iran. Although I guess, the Israelis are attacking Lebanon again, because after violating the ceasefire thousands of times since it was put in place with the Lebanese, they've now said, okay, we're not going to adhere to the ceasefire anymore. When did you ever? What ceasefire are you even talking about? So there's that, right? And then one final thing we can look to as a potential canary in the coal mine for war on the horizon with Iran is deployment of these special operations forces to the region. Okay, and we've already seen that Delta Force, the group responsible for the kidnapping of President Maduro and Celia Flores, his wife, have deployed to the Middle East. So Delta Force left Caracas. They went to Guantanamo Bay, sent the Maduros on their way to the MDC, to Southern District of New York, and they headed on off to the Middle East. So what I'm saying is there is a very real threat of war on the horizon. The Israelis obviously have been saying that this is what they want since the 12-day war came to an end. I don't even need to get into that. And what I've got to say is I feel like we've seen far too many times, take a look at this, all right? Russia. The Ukrainians built up all these NATO arms, all these very, very elaborate, military defense structures all across the Donbass, right? All across the Novorossiya region for years on end. They were slaughtering ethnic Russians in the Donbass. And before they could place nukes in Ukraine, what did Russia do? They went in. Make of the operation what you will that Russia has led. You can have critiques. You can not have critiques. You can feel however you want about it. You could say maybe it would have gone better if they had done this, that, or the third, right? Have those opinions if you want. But the fact on the ground is that in every single direction, the Russian military is moving forward faster than they have at any point since the start of the operation right now. So could you say that they moved too late? You could, but they definitely, I guess, moved quick enough if the threat was NATO taking in Ukraine, as Kamala Harris threatened at the Vilnius summit, NATO Vilnius summit with Zelensky, and they were discussing the prospects of nuclear weapons in Ukraine. Could have been worse, right? Venezuela, on the other hand, had all these ships along their coast for months on end, doing airstrikes on Colombian fishermen, Trinidad and Tobago fishermen, Venezuelan fishermen, threatening land strikes each and every day. It was like every day we had the threat of land strikes. And then eventually they did do a land strike on a port. How many of you think that North Korea would have tolerated that? Now, I know I'm apples to oranges. North Korea has nukes. They have a very robust military industrial complex in their own sovereign right. Apples to oranges, right? But still, even if North Korea didn't have nukes, do you think they would have tolerated that? Do you think they would have allowed those U.S. warships off their coast and not done a single thing about it until Kim Jong-un was grabbed in the middle of the night by Delta operators? I don't think so. I don't think so. So that leads us to the conclusion here as for Iran versus Israel and the United States. What is Iran to do? Not for me to decide. I'm an American. I really have no stake personally in the future of Iran other than I want the people's will to be reflected and respected in the future of the country. And I want prosperity for all people across the world, right? That being said, I think it goes without saying that waiting until the 11th hour of the 11th, 11th hour, the 11th minute of the 59th second of the whatever, it's like this is maybe not the best idea to say, well, we'll just let the Israelis do more decapitation strikes first, and then we'll see what we can muster up in response. Maybe it'll work for them. Maybe it won't. I don't know. But I think we should maybe also look at recent history as, as a tool, right? Everyone always says, oh, Iran didn't start this. Russia didn't start this. China didn't start this. Venezuela didn't start this. It was the imperialist order that started these attacks against these freedom-loving people. True. But what good is playing the victim if you always lose? Okay, Russia's not losing. China's not losing. Those are major, major, major powers, major countries, huge populations, massive military might, right? Question still stands. What good is waiting until someone else takes the first step if it only is going to guarantee your country, your people, your sovereignty, your cohesion as a nation a doomed defeat? I don't know. It's worth thinking about, though. Before you leave, I want to say thank you for the support, because after 2
Well, we better buckle up, because in 25 days, something massive happens that most people are not even tracking. It could change the world overnight. Mark your calendar, February 5th. That is the day, the last day of the last real nuclear guardrail between the United States and Russia is set to expire. The new START treaty, it's finished. The final remaining agreement that caps deployed strategic nuclear warheads and delivery systems. And once that guardrail is gone, you are in a world where both sides can and will start loading up again. More warheads, more missiles, more bombers without inspections, without verification, without any limits that are enforceable at all. Billions of dollars of a new Cold War if it doesn't turn hot first. And boy, the warmongers in Washington, D.C. are salivating. Oh my gosh, no guardrails. We can spend as much money as we want and push Russia into a war. And if you think it's just about like paperwork, just look around. The paperwork is dying in the middle of a global escalation cycle that we are watching in real time, because the very same week that this treaty is hanging over the cliff, Russia is reminding everyone this weekend what modern warfare actually looks like. Over the past 48 hours, Russia has hit Ukraine with a massive wave of strikes, drones, missiles, a hypersonic ballistic missile attack near the EU-NATO border, rolling out their brand new hypersonic missiles. And Kiev got hammered in a way that isn't just about headlines, it's about survival. It was total destruction. Half of the apartment buildings in Kiev, about 6,000, were reported without heat after critical infrastructure was hit. And by the way, Putin warned them. This isn't like out of the blue. I mean, let all that sink in. You're in the middle of the winter right now. Brutal temperatures in Ukraine. The mayor of Kiev is literally telling everyone, get out, leave the city if you can, find some place with power and heat if you can do it. Maybe they should go to those Kiev nightclubs that seem to be always bumping and grinding and doing totally fine. Maybe they have heat. Basically, get out of the city now was the message. It's a response to trying to attack and kill Putin at his own residence. So this is what escalation looks like when the gloves come off. It's not signals. It's not like messaging. It's freezing homes, blacked out cities, and systems collapsing under enormous pressure right now. And here's the part that nobody wants to say out loud. It's also a warning shot to Europe. By Russia putting nuclear hypersonic missiles in Belarus, it's a message that we can hit all of Europe. You will all be toast. You want to keep messing with us? You want to keep playing this game, you morons? FAFO, right? Fuck around and find out. That's exactly what Europe's about to do. Europe seems hell-bent on trying to find out. Like, what's this going to look like for us? Madness. What did Europe do in response to all of this? They moved closer to war with Russia. They're not backing off like, oh, maybe we poke the bear, maybe we should back off. No. Over the past 48 hours, the UK announced they're setting aside serious money to prepare for a potential multinational force in Ukraine after a ceasefire, upgrading vehicles, comms, anti-drone systems, basically getting troops deployment ready on Russia's doorstep. Macron in France set to send 6,000 troops to Ukraine to what? I don't know. Just be there friendly? No, to fight Russia. And of course, Russia's response, simple. Any foreign troops in Ukraine would be considered legitimate targets. By the way, we've reported here on Redacted how many of these foreign forces have already been killed. NATO forces and mercenaries. The numbers are staggering, but the mainstream media totally ignores it, won't tell you that Americans have been killed in Ukraine, that French have been killed in Ukraine. Shh. So ask yourself what this turns into when you've got NATO countries staging forces, Russia threatening to strike them, and the last nuclear restraint treaty expiring in the middle of it all. This isn't the risk of escalation. This is escalation. Now I want to pull the camera back even further because Ukraine isn't the only chessboard. The next one is the Arctic. Major news this week on that. We've been reporting about this on Redacted for years. The Arctic isn't just ice and polar bears, it's shipping lanes, missile routes, radar. The minerals that power the next century are there. Russia and China have already been deepening cooperation in the Arctic. They have a massive presence there. And their infrastructure, the dual-use presence, the Northern Sea Route, the shortcut that changes global trade when it opens, cuts weeks off of global trade routes, avoids having to go through the crazy Middle East and the Suez Canal. Would you want to send your ships through the Suez Canal? No, thanks. And now what you're watching in the United States, their response is the most Trump way possible. Greenland. Trump isn't even hiding it. He's saying that Greenland is about Russia and China, and it's about national security, the Arctic, total control. Listen to Trump.
We are going to do something on Greenland, whether they like it or not, because if we don't do it, Russia or China will take over Greenland, and we're not going to have Russia or China as a neighbor.
We're not going to allow Russia or China to occupy Greenland, he says. And now we've got reports that the White House has discussed direct payments to Greenlanders, numbers being floated anywhere from $10,000 to $100,000 per person as part of an effort to pull Greenland away from Denmark and into the United States orbit. Meanwhile, Denmark is basically screaming, if you want to try to take Greenland by force, you're talking about a NATO on NATO disaster. That means NATO is totally irrelevant at this point because we're going to take Greenland from a NATO country. You know, and as you heard Trump say, Trump's like, hey, just because they landed a boat there 500 years ago doesn't lay claim to that land. Okay, here we go. So again, treaties collapsing, war postures rising, Arctic scramble accelerating. And then we got to the part that should terrify everyone because it tells you what the people in charge think is coming. Trump is pushing a $1.5 trillion Pentagon budget for 2027. Let's translate that into English for you. This is not a peacetime budget. This is not a we're de-escalating budget. This is a budget built for sustained global confrontation, a permanent war footing. And even Tucker Carlson this week looked at that number and said what a lot of people are thinking. Watch.
So I think it's fair to expect, and all the signs suggest, that we're going to have a big war soon. A big war soon.
Exactly. Now add one more layer on top of that, Germany. Germany's economy has been in real trouble. And this week, in my interview with Professor Richard Werner, one of the most respected economists alive, he laid out just how dire Germany's economy situation is right now.
I mean, Germany, the economy is collapsing, is really in dire straits. Other European economies are not much better. And so, you know, this all adds up to really policy-imposed, self-imposed disaster upon disaster.
He's right. And when economies start collapsing, governments look for solutions. Historically, one of the oldest solutions in the book is turning the machine towards wartime production because it creates demand, it creates jobs. It gives politicians an external enemy to rally around, artificially transforming the economy. And we're watching that mindset is spread across Europe as we speak, not just defense wartime posture. So what's the common thread connecting Ukraine, the Arctic, Europe's war posture, and America's exploding military budget? Commodities, oil, gold, copper, silver, you name it right now. It's off the charts focus on commodities, rare earths. This is the battle. This is the shipping lane battle right now that we're watching as the U.S. on Friday captured another oil tanker, the fifth one. So this is a war over the stuff that makes modern empires completely run. We just watched the United States snatch Maduro and immediately start talking about controlling Venezuela's oil flows and revenues. And in my interview this week with former CIA officer Kevin Shipp, he's a whistleblower. They tried to destroy his life after he blew the whistle on the CIA. He made this point bluntly. This is about the petrodollar and the fight to keep the dollar's power when the world is trying to move around it. Listen.
A CIA pretext to go in and kidnap the leader of a nation that was leading the petrodollar and starting to do business with China and Russia, especially.
Of course, he's 100% correct. And here's the key point. When the world shifts into a commodities war posture, when treaties collapse, militaries posture, currencies get weaponized, people who can read the room stop trusting paper promises alone. Just look at silver exploding because of what's happening right now. So in 25 days, will cooler heads prevail, or are we barreling towards a new Cold War, a $1.5 trillion Cold War? Let me know. Well, that's the
A few hours ago, retired U.S. Army General Ben Hodges finally admitted that the Ukrainian army is not in a position to defeat Russia on the battlefield. Nevertheless, this American general expressed confidence that Ukraine will still emerge victorious from this war if Kiev adheres to a special strategy in confrontation with Russia. In particular, Ben Hodges suggested that the Ukrainian generals focus only on strikes against strategic targets in Russia. According to an American general, Ukraine should step up attacks on Russia's oil and gas infrastructure, which allegedly continues to be the main source of financing for this war. Ben Hodges is confident that it is precisely the Ukrainian attacks on oil refineries, oil depots, logistics hubs, and oil tankers that cause Russia the most damage, rather than what is happening on the battlefield. I am sure that Ukraine's future victory lies in the destruction of Russia's oil and gas infrastructure, and in Moscow's ability to export oil and gas to countries such as China and India. Ukraine should increase production of long-range drones, and significantly increase the number of attacks on the Russian oil and gas infrastructure, including oil tankers. In the current situation, this is the only right way. This is the only way Ukraine can win, U.S. Army General Ben Hodges said. Meanwhile, while Ben Hodges continues to dream of a future victory for Ukraine, the Russian army has achieved another major success on the battlefield. In particular, on the morning of January 11th, war correspondents reported that the settlement of Belgorod, in the Zaporizhia region, had completely come under the Russian army's control. As a consequence of Russian troops' success, the Ukrainian defense along the northern bank of the Konka River virtually ceased to exist. Furthermore, the capture of Belgorod also allowed the Russian army to unite the Huliapol and Orikhiv directions of the front. At the moment, the Ukrainian army units continue to retreat towards the city of Orikhiv. Over the past 24 hours, the successes of the Russian troops have also been recorded in the Kupiansk direction of the front. In particular, the Russian Defense Ministry has officially confirmed that Ukrainian troops and foreign mercenaries continue to suffer huge losses, trying to break into the city of Kupiansk. Thus, the Russian military actually refuted all the statements of the Ukrainian and Western propaganda about the local successes of the Ukrainian troops in Kupiansk. Furthermore, on January 11th, representatives of the Russian Defense Ministry also announced the entry of Russian army units into the settlement of Kupiansk-Uzlovoy, south of Kupiansk. Currently, in this locality, Russian troops have managed to take control of Zelezno-Dorozhnaya Street. This success allowed the Russian army to gain a foothold in new positions on the left bank of the Oskol River. However, unfortunately for the Kiev regime and its Western masters, the successes of the Russian troops did not end there. As it turned out, on January 11th, the Russian army completely dislodged Ukrainian troops from such settlements as Verolyubovka and Markovo, in the Sloviansk direction of the front. My dear seekers of truth, by taking control of these settlements, the Russian army has created a convenient springboard for a future offensive against the strategically important city of Kramatorsk. Now, the Russians can attack this city not only head-on, but also on the flanks, cutting off the supply routes of the Ukrainian group. Meanwhile, on the night of January 11th, Russia launched another massive missile attack on Ukraine. This time, independent monitoring services recorded 170 powerful explosions in regions such as Kiev, Kharkiv, Chernihiv, Zhytomyr, and Odessa. It is well known that in the Kiev, Kharkiv, and Chernihiv regions, the main targets of Russian missiles and kamikaze drones were energy infrastructure facilities, as well as objects of logistics support for the Ukrainian army. In the Zhytomyr region, 12 kilometers south of the city of Zhytomyr, Russian drones and cruise missiles hit the Ozernoye military airfield. As a result, 5 hangars with Ukrainian aircraft-type drones were destroyed. And finally, in the Odessa region, independent monitoring services recorded the largest number of explosions. As it turned out, dozens of Russian Iskander-M ballistic missiles and about 100 uranium kamikaze drones rained down on the port infrastructure of the city in order to disrupt the supply of weapons from NATO countries. In addition, 20 kilometers south of Odessa, at least 3 Iskander-M ballistic missiles wiped out the building of a local dairy plant. As it turned out, the General Staff of Ukraine used the building of this plant to house fighters from the elite sabotage detachment of the Ukrainian army, which was supervised by high-ranking British army officers. Later, sources in the Russian Defense Ministry confirmed the death of not only dozens of elite Ukrainian soldiers and foreign mercenaries, but also 3 British army colonels, who trained them in tactics of conducting underwater sabotage operations in the Black Sea. At the same time, it is worth noting that Russia eliminated these elite fighters and high-ranking army officers immediately after British Defense Minister John Healey, while in Kiev, bluntly stated that he would gladly organize the kidnapping of Vladimir Putin in order to force Russia to accept Ukraine's terms and stop this war. By the way, the official representative of the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Maria Zakharova, commented on these provocative words of a high-ranking British official. In particular, she called these words the wet dreams of British perverts. Well, my dear truth seekers, I am absolutely sure that next time, the British owners of the bearded dwarf will think 1,000 times before saying such things about Vladimir Putin. Otherwise, the flow of zinc coffins with British servicemen will only grow with each new month.
Cuffing. Follow me